Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Councilmember Agrimonti. Here. Councilmember Cook.
Here.
Councilmember Hundley.
Here.
Vice Mayor Harvey.
Here.
Mayor Harrington.
Present.
Thank you.
We did not have any closed session, so there's no report out. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Motion to approve.
Second.
Roll call.
Councilmember Agrimonti. Aye. Councilmember Cook.
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Harvey.
Yes.
Mayor Harrington.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
On to public comment. At this time, members of the public may comment on any item not appearing on the agenda. It is recommended that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less under state law unless otherwise permitted under the Ralph M. Brown Act. The merits of the matters presented under this item cannot be discussed or acted upon by the City Council at this time. For items appearing on the agenda, the public will be invited to make comments at the time the item comes up for council consideration. Upon being acknowledged, please step to the podium and speak into the microphone and begin by stating and spelling your name and giving your address. Thank you.
Good evening, City Council. Fred Allebach, 19550 8th Street East. I'm here as a member of the CSEC Climate Change Subcommittee to give you a quarterly update as per our CC4 track and report to the City Council. I'd like to point out that the RCPA and others are circulating requests to pass a new climate emergency resolution. And 4 years ago, in 2016, we went from the RCPA Climate Action 2020 plan now to a climate emergency declaration. And apparently we have 8 or 10 years to turn the bus around before we reach a tipping point from which our kids and grandkids won't be able to come back from. So this update can maybe be addressed during the council's quarterly agenda, quarterly calendar item. I'd also like to note the committed and really dedicated people that we have working with us on the climate change subcommittee, one of which is here tonight, Tom Conlon, and David Morrell and David Leland. And those guys are great, and they really do a great job. And David Leland has completed the GHG greenhouse gas accounting class, and support still remains available for that. From our last CSEC meeting, if you could have a chance to listen to the recording of Tom and David's report, it's really interesting. Everyone was really interested by it, and Tom's PowerPoint slides, and it was very informational. And so I feel like when you have good horses, let them pull the cart, and these guys are really good. And so for our first CC1 work plan item, provide content for the city website. We're close to getting to that. And for CC2 and CC3, which is metrics for tracking citywide greenhouse gases and municipal greenhouse gas emissions, I'll move on to CC4, track and report to the City Council, and say that that our commission has gotten ahead of staff's ability to keep up with the subcommittee request for information. And we've been pushing ever since the start. And Fergie noticed that we were really banging on the door. And so the city's going to hire a sustainability coordinator to work with the CSEC, and hopefully this will allow staff to keep up with us. And if there is an emergency, that it might deserve a priority. Other jurisdictions are implementing climate emergency resolutions to address same set of issues that we have here in the city. And the CSEC's discussed a number of recommendations, which my colleague Tom will follow after me in public comment to talk about. And then we have CC5 research state guidance for local communities, and that's ongoing. And Tom and David have looked into inventory boundary issues of what kind of jurisdiction, where it can be measured by finance, by scope differences. And so with that, my time's up, and I'll let Tom follow me.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Tom Conlon, 1850 Robinson Road. I'll just pick up where Fred left off. It hasn't always been my position that we needed to form and pass a resolution declaring a climate emergency here in Sonoma. We were ahead in 2016. We were the first community in the county to endorse the climate action plan. And we've done a number of things here, but the reality is we're not moving fast enough to address the crisis at hand. And so I have the slideshow I'll send to Rebecca Barr for distribution to you all that Fred mentioned. The RCPA has declared that we use this template, recommended we use this template. Petaluma has already passed a resolution. Windsor's passed a resolution, pending in Santa Rosa, perhaps other communities I'm not aware of at this time. We need to reorient our priorities. We need to give our staff at the city the time and budget that's necessary to address the crisis. This will impact our economy. It's already impacted our economy here in Sonoma County. It will continue to escalate in its impacts to our economy and our way of life. And so I implore you to pay attention to this issue and to prioritize it, make it a key initiative of the city manager, and allocate appropriate budget to address the needs. And I have a number of recommendations. I'm not seeing the time. I want to be cognizant of that. Thank you. We should catch up on all the work, the climate change action work plan tasks that we've already set out for ourselves by the end of this year. In particular, implementation of the long overdue local measures that we committed to back in 2016, specifically keeping track of our water usage, because half of our energy savings, our greenhouse gas savings, comes from our water savings here in the city. The city has a great deal of control over its water as the city's water manager, but in fact we don't even have we haven't received data from the city for what the water consumption is, so we can't even analyze where we're at. We'd like to know solar photovoltaic installations for the city. Keep track of that because that was a significant set of our goals. We said we made a commitment to pass an idling ordinance more strict than the state requirements. There's been no progress on that to speak of since 2016. The city, I know, has plans to implement a single-use plastics ban, and we've heard a report at CSEC that since the ban has gone into place at the plaza, the waste diversion has increased dramatically. We really have a lot less of that waste, and that's a very good thing to celebrate, but that means we can build on that success elsewhere throughout the city. Other communities in the county are implementing an all-electric reach code for new construction. It saves people money when they're rebuilding. It makes sense to not spend money on natural gas infrastructure when it will be obsolete. It's already relatively obsolete. We should also consider seriously banning new gas stations here in Sonoma, as Petaluma has done recently. In Sebastopol, they have a Bus Buddies program where celebrities and electeds hop on the local free shuttle, and it gets people to break the ice and practice riding around on a bus and getting out of their car. Something we could be doing here in Sonoma too. I encourage all of you to, I would be happy to hop on a bus with you all as well. So we have a lot of creative ideas, and I know we have support from the council and from the staff. We just need to get ourselves organized and move forward. Thank you for your consideration of my comments.
Thank you very much, Tom. Are there any other members of the public?
Yes, good evening, Mayor Harrington, City Council members, staff, members of the public. My name is Terry Shore. I'm the Regional Director for the North Bay for Greenbelt Alliance. And Greenbelt Alliance is an environmental policy organization that works to protect the Greenbelt, but also to support the right development in the right places. So I'm sorry that I missed the September 4th meeting when you discussed the urban growth boundary, the general plan, the housing element, and other very important long-term planning issues. I was on vacation. I did call a few of you, but I'm back. And I just sent a detailed comment letter with some additional thoughts for you. Greenbelt Alliance urges the City Council to publish a timeline as soon as possible for the deadlines and public process to place a renewal measure on the ballot for the urban growth boundary for November 2020. I believe you voted to move forward.
We're actually going to talk about our agenda planning for the quarter, so the issues you're talking about are actually an agendized item for tonight.
They putting that, okay. So in addition to that, I'd like to make some comments regarding the importance of the urban growth boundary related to climate change. One of the most important things that you can do is to renew the urban growth boundary and make sure that future growth is contained within the city. That's one of the biggest contributors to climate change is vehicle miles traveled, people driving to and from work. I I'd like to kind of like just do the numbers. I know a lot of people are raising questions about the urban growth boundary and the potential constraints on housing. Really, we need to separate the two because the urban growth boundary doesn't tell you what to build. It just says where to build. And so right now, you know, we're about 11,000 people, and we have about 54 housing units, and we've been growing at about 1% per year. We're expected to grow another 4.5% and reach 11,916 people in 2022. You know, if we continue to grow at that rate or even more, in another 20 years, we may be looking at another 1,200 people or maybe even 2,000 people. If there are 2 people per house, that's about 1,000 new units. And right now, the city of Sonoma has more than 200 units in the pipeline. There's lots of room to grow in the city to add an additional up to around 1,300 additional housing units based on existing zoning and code. So we have plenty of room to grow, and I hope that everyone will consider that as we move forward on renewing the urban growth boundary and looking at our housing plan and our strategy to meet the needs of Sonoma for now and the next generation.
Thank you very much. Is there any other member of the public that would like to comment on an item not on the agenda? Okay, seeing no one come forward, I will close public comment. Now I'd like to make a meeting dedication. I'd like to dedicate this meeting to Tim Gray. He was 57 of Sonoma. He passed away on August 29th, 2019. During his earlier years, Tim enjoyed being on the swim team, motocross racing, surfing, and making all kinds of mischief with his brother and friends. He attended local schools Presswood and Altamira and graduated from the high school in the class of 1980. He went on to earn a BS in Geological Sciences from San Diego State University in 1985, and after graduation, Tim married his high school sweetheart, Andrea Smith. They moved to Texas, where Tim earned his MS in Petroleum Geology in 1987 from Texas A&M University. After working in the Texas oil fields, Tim and Andrea returned home to Sonoma in 1991, where they formed their real estate development business, Gray Oil and Land, LLC, and construction company, Gray Company, Inc. Together with the help of numerous talented people in the trade, they built many gorgeous homes throughout Sonoma Valley. Tim was a pillar of the community and always ready to help those in time of need. In October of 2017, Tim and several of his friends and neighbors banded together to lead an offensive against the fires to save Mission Highlands and Boys Hot Springs using his beloved vintage fire truck. This is just one example of how Tim cared so deeply for his hometown. And Tim is survived by his wife, Andrea of Sonoma, his son, Peter, and his daughter, Allison, and his wife's precious dog, Lily of Sonoma, his brother, Jeff, and his niece, Jamie, nephew, Kyle, his mother-in-law, Gloria Smith of Sonoma, and sisters-in-law, Michelle Smith and Susan Lindstrom and Jamie Smith. And so we'd just like to dedicate this meeting tonight to Tim Gray. Are there any other dedications? All right. Our next item is a presentation to recognize the Sonoma Volunteer Firefighters Association. It's so nice to see many of you here tonight. This is, as many people know, a complete volunteer organization, and they manage the spectacular fireworks presentation on our 4th of July and have done so for many years. This is the 3rd year since taking responsibility for the 4th of July parade and the all-day festival. And as we all know, the 4th of July is not only wonderful for people who live here, but it's also a homecoming weekend when everyone comes back, and it's so special here. So thank you so much for organizing all that. And now I'd like to introduce Bob Norbaum and ask him to introduce the leadership team and talk a little bit about their work.
Thank you. I actually wasn't expecting to talk tonight, so I'll wing it, which I'm good at that, so we'll see how I can do. So Tim Gray, thank you for dedicating this meeting to him. He's a pillar in the community. He'll be sorely missed. He has organized our splash zone for probably 15 years with his fire truck. So we're now going to have the Tim Gray Memorial Splash Zone.
Oh,
And we're going to continue to honor that tradition. So thank you, and thank you for having us here and at your council meeting. It's an honor to present the most cherished event in Sonoma. So I couldn't do it. We couldn't do it without the team that we have behind me. It's all volunteer orchestrated. So we don't put any community funds. It's all donations and grants from the city of Sonoma, and that's what it takes to put this on. It's a very difficult, trying event, but we get it done with the help of all these folks back here. So Joe Bolt, who has been, it's his 32nd year putting on the fireworks show. And he couldn't do it without the support of his family, who's in the back row. So as I announce you, stand up, Joe.
And he knows the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yes, he's good at that. So Joe, we want to continue to have this event, and we continue to need support from the community to do it. It's all on donations and grants, so thank you for the support. The parade coordinator is Joe Keechler. Stand up, Joe. So he puts on the parade, which is not an easy task to do. This year, we were pretty successful in getting the parade going. We're going to try and make it even better next year. Thank you, Joe, for all your help. And Jason Campbell, he is the festival coordinator, so everything that goes on down on the plaza is Jason's responsibility. No Dusty tonight to help you. So Jason takes care of all of the vendors and all of the coordination of the activities on the plaza. So thank you, Jason, for your help. And the fire chief, Chief Aker, he also supports us with our endeavor throughout the entire year. We couldn't do it without the support of the chief, so thank you, Steve. Joe Neely also helps out with the fireworks. He's actually the coordinator of the grand finale. We all love the grand finale, right? So thank you, Joe. And Kyle Laley, he also does all of the vendor coordination, which is a big task to coordinate all of the food trucks and all the vendors on the plaza, and he gets all the complaints. So he's good with the complaint department. And I can't leave out my wife, Anna, who runs the wine booth. Thank you for running the wine booth. So, again, without this team that we have behind us, we couldn't do it. It's Sonoma Volunteer Firefighters Association that puts it on, but it's actually the entire department. You have both folks that are professional firefighters and volunteer firefighters back there. And we all kind of come together to make this event happen. So,
Well, maybe we'll have a round of applause for you now, and then we have a few other. So before I give you the plaque, I just wanted to acknowledge that there's thousands of details that go into making this event go off without a hitch, and we recognize that, and thank you for that work. And also thank you to your families for letting you donate your time to the city, because we know they support you, and that helps us as well. We appreciate that you're willing to try new ideas, like changing the parade route this year. A risky endeavor to change anything in Sonoma, but I think it went really well. So thank you for that. And just how amazing it is that after we have this enormous party that everyone loves, the next day it's almost pristine and it's completely cleaned up, and it doesn't really it doesn't wreak havoc like you would think it would, and it's just a beautiful night for everybody, especially for kids running around, seeing the end of the fireworks show and all those things. So with that, I would like to give you a plaque, and the city council would like to take a photo with you if you want to come on up, everybody.
come on up.
How about here? You guys can come down. Good job.
Madeline, we gotta mix you guys a little more. I can't see Madeline. Dave, you wanna come over here maybe?
Somebody bring him a And before we conclude this item, can I ask you to stay? Don't leave yet. Firefighters. One last item we forgot on this. Sorry. Chief Aker.
Yeah, thank you. So I do want to acknowledge one more person who really is so humble that he didn't acknowledge his own part in this, and that is Bob Norbaum. This was, taking over this whole event from the community center was obviously a very big endeavor, especially for another volunteer organization in the community. And it was really Bob who spearheaded that, and not only with the idea and the commitment that this needed to be another hometown group that put on this celebration, but that it belonged with us as a service organization to the community. So it was Bob's foresight to bring this into the volunteer association, and then he's also led the entire event. He's been in charge of the entire event for the last 3 years. So a ton of work and effort on his part, and support from his family and Anna. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Like that's it encapsulates everything that's wonderful about this town. Our next item is the consent calendar. All items listed on the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be acted upon by a single motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action. At this time, the council may decide to change the order of the agenda. Are there any council questions about the consent calendar? No, I will take it out to the public. Are there any members of the public that would like to make a comment on the consent calendar or pull an item? No, I will close public comment. Is there a motion?
So move to approve the consent calendar 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 0.4, 0.5,
Second.
0.6, and 0.7 and 8.
Pardon me. Now I second.
Can we get a roll call?
Councilmember Agrimonti,
Aye.
Councilmember Cook,
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Harvey,
Yes.
Mayor Harrington.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously.
Great. Now on to the regular calendar of the City Council. Item 6.1 is discussion and direction on quarterly City Council agenda planning for October through December of 2019, including discussion of any new agenda items. And I will turn it over to our City Manager, Kathy Capriola.
Thank you, Mayor Harrington, members of the council and community. So as council is aware, this is a new process. We started back in late 2017 where basically 3 to 4 times a year we look forward in the next 90 days and staff puts together a list of what kind of major items that we know of that are coming. This is not there may be some things that are going to come in the next 90 days that aren't on this list yet, but these are some of the bigger items that we know of that are going to be in the regular agenda. And the purpose of this is to give council and the community a preview, also to give council an opportunity to raise additional items. Is there something you'd like to agendize for conversation? And also reviewing kind of overall priorities. So again, this is a 3-year plan, 3 month. I want to be really clear, this is a plan. It will shift. There'll be things that aren't ready. Something else will come. So don't hold us to X date as we've listed, but we try our best to make these deadlines. So just some other things over the next 90 days, things that staff is really focused on, so you know where some of our time is. There's a lot of work based on council's approval of the budget. So we've been doing a lot of hiring of some key staff and also a lot of capital projects, finishing some things for summer and trying to tee things up to get bids done for this next year. Also, there's quite a bit of development processing and projects going on. Public Works and planning and building are incredibly busy. And in particular, the kind of Verizon cell towers is taking a chunk of planning's time, as well as council's aware. And we're also beginning to, do some of the planning conversations with the UGB and housing and the general plan. Plus, as we gave you an update last meeting, there is a lot of kind of preparation around the PG&E public safety power shutoff, which was not something we expected to do a year ago. So with that, I'll have the city clerk, which you can get up the the one-page summary. We'll talk this through and show it here. Again, council members, if they know of something ahead of time, they let me know and I put it on here so you all have a kind of a heads up, and so does the community. One of the items that a council member put up was to create a citizens group to explore opportunities to enhance recreation opportunities, and that was the only additional specific item I received ahead of time. So we're trying to get this up, but meanwhile, while maybe we're having some technical glitches, maybe I'll turn it back to the council, and I would like to kind of briefly go through, I was hoping to do it visually.
Well, just if we have a minute while you're looking, I just wanted to remind the public that it had been an ongoing question for people about when items were coming back or how to get things on the agenda, and this council, along with the city manager, changed that process. So we have a very public process so people know what we're working on quarter by quarter and have an opportunity to make comments on what they think should be in that quarter given the work that's ahead of us. So I just think I'm happy to do this process again, and it's a real improvement for transparency and also for organizing our work.
Great. So, council members, this was in the packet ahead of time, so if you do want to look in your electronic, I apologize, we got new laptops and new systems, and it was working and now it's not. So let me just kind of briefly, in October 7th, some of the things we're going to be working on is we'll have a police annual report, an update about vacation rental enforcement. Also, we did a summer recreation program, and so we'll have a report on that. And council wanted to talk about your community, your recreation community services funding. This is funding, there's about $25,000 that was unallocated, another $25,000 that's in your discretionary, excuse me. And so, not yet. So you wanted to have a conversation about what else could be done with some of that funding. We hope to be back after conversations with your ad hoc to talk about the Ting monument. And housing impact fees will be coming up for some direction, and going to do a brief update on general emergency preparedness we've been doing. So that's the next meeting. October 11th, we'll be bringing the 2019 building code. Hope to bring the draft regulations for cannabis and potentially fees.
Is that October 21st?
October 21st, thank you. And then the Sonoma Ecology Center just went through Planning Commission for their master plan, and that will require some lease adjustments. So looking at bringing that back on the 21st at all. And then the city clerk is working on a conflict of interest update with the city attorney. Then the last week in October, we're looking at doing our joint study session between this council and the Planning Commission, focused on the UGB, general plan, process timing, and development code, some of those key updates. That'll be a joint meeting, and we're still finalizing dates in terms of what we're looking at that last week in October. First week in November, we look forward to bringing council your first 5-year forecast, an opportunity to really look and kind of start to, as a tool to plan our financial future. You currently have a cell tower ordinance that is an urgency ordinance that's in place, and we want to bring the permanent ordinance back and get that finalized. And then an annual report from our fire department to give an overall comprehensive update about their accomplishments. Then the week of November 11th, we'd be planning another joint meeting between the Planning Commission and Council to do some CEQA training. This is something Council wanted to do earlier this year and asked us to schedule. And then November 18th, we have been doing a lot of work on the Casa Grande parking lot, trying to get agreements with the state, and just feels like hopefully by that time we'll be able to kind of not probably bring anything back formally, but at least give a kind of a more public update. You're looking at the 16-17 audit tonight. We hope to bring back the 17-18 audit on November 18th, and also have a conversation about our housing inclusionary ordinance. And we will be also working on some of our vacant land inventory and a housing action plan, and potentially bringing back either a scope of work or maybe a consultant contract. Then we move in December, and the year's almost done, crazy as that is. The fire department has some fee updates that they are going to be moving forward. And all of the city's recreation contracts are, we've did 3-year contracts. Those will be done the end of June. And so we'd like to kind of get a head start if there's things that you would like to see there, and look at either reviews or extensions. And then we've had a great partnership with Sonoma County Transit on their Fare Free program, and they've got some other projects to come do an update with you on. looking at doing a retreat with the city council, probably the first or second week, in December as well. And then last meeting of the year is when we do our council reorganization, new mayor, vice mayor selected. Staff's working on kind of the memorial bench policy and donation policy. We also bring some financial policies, and then we'll bring the 2020 calendar. So some things that aren't on the list in terms of formal dates, if there is an appeal on the Verizon commercial cell tower, our agreement with Verizon was that had to be done the end of December. With Planning Commission's action last week, their public meeting, there was a continuance of that, and so the Planning Commission will be holding another meeting, which meant we needed additional time. So our time sequence now is the end of January. So if there is an appeal that has to be heard by the City Council, I anticipate that would be heard in January, not December. And as it was alluded to in our public comments, the city is hiring a half-time sustainability coordinator. Depending on when that person is hired, could be sometime in the next 90 days where we bring kind of some prioritization and some conversations back to the council, but we'd be talking to CSCC as well. So I apologize that the technical difficulty isn't there, but that is an update of kind of what's in front of us for the next 90 days.
Great. So I think the process that makes sense to me is that I have an item that's on here, the park and the recreation item, and I also have a second item. So maybe I'll introduce those so the public can comment on them, and then after the public comment, we can have discussion about it. So the item that isn't on here is I'd like to hold a hearing, or not a hearing, I'd like to hold basically a study session and receive a report from the city about the ongoing concerns with the neighbors about the lodge, hotel, and the loading dock, and some of the issues that people have been talking to us about over there. I know the city's had a meeting trying to make progress. David Storer has been working on it, and I spoke to the city manager, and they're happy to give us a report on what's happened and what improvements are underway and expected. So I would like to give that a forum to be discussed. So that's one item. And then the second item, I am actually going to ask Karen Collins, our alcaldessa, if she can come up to the podium, please. And this was really her idea, and so she's probably it's a great idea, but she's probably the best person to discuss it. And we all know that she is our alcaldessa, but also she is the former deputy director of California State Parks, former chair of the California State Trails Commission. She was 3 times the chair and a current commissioner at the Sonoma County Regional Parks Commission. She's a co-founder of the Sonoma Overlook Trail. She's a member. She's a former member of the CSEC. She is a member of the Bay Area Ridge Trail Council Board of Directors, a former member. Member of the Yosemite Institute Board of Directors, a newly appointed member to the Measure M Oversight Committee, members of steering committees for all open space district campaigns, Cows Not Casinos campaign, Measure M campaign, and a former board member at the Sonoma Ecology Center, and also, as we all know, a dynamite organizer and a great person to work with. So with that, Karen, if you would introduce this idea, I think that would be very helpful.
Well, first of all, thank you for your time. And then secondly, thank you for the dedication to Tim Gray. I think that's so well deserved, and I think that was very moving for me, and I think for everybody here. My idea is for the city to take a look at forming some kind of an advisory committee, either through an ad hoc committee or maybe through the CSEC, but that could take a really good look at what's going on, what we have going on in parks and recreation. I've been thinking about this, but I think that now there's a lot of opportunity now because there's so many moving parts. For example, Maxwell is about to get a major overhaul, and I think Larson Park is not very far behind. I read in the paper that Norm Krug is planning on putting some money in ball fields. The high school is putting in some new fields. Sonoma Splash seems to be getting closer with the pool. The Overlook Trail just had a major overhaul. Tier 1 recipients are looking at new recreation programs that could qualify for funding. There is some potential new money I think you know about. Measure M is going to have $125,000 a year or more for the next 10 years. There are Proposition 68 funds that, given the right project, could be applied for. I don't know where the money was coming from for the money for the horse park, but you know, there was at least some consideration for a park when you voted for those funds. And some of the cities I've been looking at use user fees, so those are always an option, you know, for any kind of recreation or programs that you could put in. My proposal would be to form I mentioned an ad hoc or perhaps a committee through the CSEC of citizens who are interested in this, maybe 7 people, maybe 9 people, and take a look at what's currently being going on in cities up in Sonoma and Napa County that are about our size. And I picked out 7 cities that have populations of under 15,000 that we could take a look at. Those would be Yountville, St. Helena, Calistoga, Hillsburg, Cloverdale, Sebastopol, and Cotati. Those are all under 15,000. I've talked to several people about it to see what their interest is just in going forward with a committee, and most of them said, I mean, I'm not committing them, but most of them said that they would be willing to serve on such a committee if asked. So I'd just like to tell you who some of these people are. I have talked to all of the Tier 1 board presidents, Steve McCrosty from the Community Center, and I've also talked to John Gurney, Bob Queller, chair of the board of Vintage House, David Morrell, the chair of the board at the Ecology Center, Dub Hay, chair of the Boys and Girls Club, and he's also had given me some other younger families with children that are participating in programs that have asked to participate, and I've talked to them. I've talked to Marcelo DeFreitas, who's the board chair at La Luz. I've talked to SEC members, Fred Allerbach, Kimberly Blattner, and I mentioned David Morrell. The families that Dub had me talk to were the Bevins and the San Giacomos and the Malls. Recreation is really can be very much a part of health. So I talked to Simon Blattner, who's head of the, who's chair of the Sonoma Valley Foundation Board. I talked to Joshua Reimer, who is chair of the hospital itself. And I talked to Whitney Evans, who is looking at some program, or Whitney's interested in everything, but also particularly interested in programs for seniors. I also talked to Joanna Kemper, who's here, who has been the chair of the Overlook Trail, and her co-chair, Jenny Nichols, and to Tom Russert and Darren Petrie, who I think you know have been putting on the birding programs, and they've been involved in the Plaza, the trees, and they just put on the Nature Optics Festival last weekend. You know, there's always an issue. Staff I know they're overcommitted, and it takes a lot to get some of these things started. So I talked to David McEwen, who is the chair of the Political Science Department at Sonoma State. And he said, Karen, if the city would like to put together sanction some kind of a group, he said, I will get you 1 or 2 graduate students, and he said, and they'll be graded on this, so they'll have to do a good job, and they will help you, you know, do a research study of these, you know, best practices to turn back to the city and let the city make some decisions. And I would just say that going into this, I have no preconceived outcome or no preconceived idea of what an outcome could be. I think this should just be really taking a look at best practices and see if there's anything that we can pick up that we can add. Maybe we're doing everything perfectly, but if we can get some ideas from some of these other cities that are our size, why reinvent the wheel? So that is my proposal, and I'll leave my notes here.
Okay. Wonderful. And if you want to, you could turn that into the city clerk, and she can give us a copy. Thank you. So those are the 2 items I had, which is 1, a study session to get an update on what's going. Not yet. We'll have public comment on all topics at the end, and everyone will have 3 minutes to comment on all these. So 1 is a study session on the lodge. The other is the citizens group regarding recreation. Those are my 2. Does anyone else have an item they want us to consider? No. Okay. With that, I will open up public comment, and anybody who would like to make a comment on this, please come forward now.
So I'm here for other items.
Oh, Patricia, can you
Patricia Cullinan. I'm here for other items, but I wanted to propose that the cemetery become a public park. We have a wonderful cemetery. It's important to our community, to the history, and so many people use it for exercise. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Council and staff, Joanna Kemper. I just wanted to support Karen's idea. I think it's just, we don't know what's out there. We don't know what we're doing, you know, all the different programs that we have, and it just might be an opportunity that we don't have to spend any city money to look into it and come back with information for you all. And if there's a recommendation to give, we'll have one for you.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing no one rise, I will close public comment on this item and bring it back to the council for discussion. Councilmember Hundley?
I will go. Still a lot of things in these last few months, and I think we were trying to make December a lot like super light, but there's always things to pack in there. There's some of the things on here are finally winding down, like Canada's regulations. I'm finally happy to see that that's going to come to an end, and then we're going to have to go through the process of accepting our applications and going through the vetting process and then picking our person. The inclusionary ordinance has been dragging for a long time. The housing action plan is coming up. The impact fee in October 7th, that's been dragging for, I don't know, 2 years now, but it's finally coming to an end. But so I'm really happy that we are going to be able to close out a lot of these big projects that we've had. With regard to the two suggested items, the first, as far as the situation with the lodge and the surrounding neighborhood, I'm encouraged by the steps that have been taken by our code enforcement and by staff and by the lodge. And their new personnel to be focusing on that. And I would rather leave that as a matter of code enforcement to be resolved because I think it's heading in that direction. And I think that if individual council members wanted to meet with the neighbors, that would be totally appropriate. But I don't think that opening the door to this meeting to code enforcement matters would be a route that we would want to go down, because we have, I could just see that expanding into things that are perhaps unintended. But for the recreation, I think it's a great idea, and it's our whole landscape of recreation is really interesting because it's like evolved in a very kind of strange way, but we have very established like organizations that do things, and we support them, but we don't have a traditional Parks and Rec department, but we do have parks. So I think that I see like two sides to it. Like there's the side of there's so much more we could be doing, like programming, especially for seniors and for older kids. And historically, what I've seen is a more like a Band-Aid approach where there's sort of like little things here and there, but I think the whole thing just needs to be like, completely reviewed and surveyed. And I think understanding the history of why we ended up with the situation that we're in, there was a park and rec district in the valley that failed while it was closed. I will not say it failed in the late 80s, and and then the assets got transferred to the county, and now they are regional parks taking care of them. And so all of these things, I think we haven't really taken the time to put that path together. And I know that some cities have things like park and recreation master plans or park and recreation elements as part of their general plan, which I think we should definitely have, because it would make a lot more sense to be able to view things holistically. So I see two pieces to this. One, on the city side, just like we're doing a housing strategic plan, just like we're going to do an economic plan, I think that this is something that we need to be moving towards as a city, but it's going to take a while and probably some money. And then there's like this, we have so many smart people in the community, which Karen, you've mentioned so many of them, and there's so much information out there. And I do think it would be a great exercise to get all these smart people together in the same room and look at what other people are doing. The only thing I wonder is the structure of it, and I just know that putting things under the umbrella of the city can get clogged up with the Brown Act and bureaucracy and things. So like things like, like Sustainable Sonoma has had a lot more freedom to be able to bring people together to talk about these things. like, I almost think that that meeting would be more enjoyable and more productive if it was not an official city committee. And then maybe as a city council, we could designate someone to represent the council as a part of this measure. Or, you know, if we wanted to try to make it work as a city committee. But I just think that that would be probably move a lot slower than people would like. And it takes a lot of staff organization for that. But
So, thank you. Briefly on that point, I spoke to Kathy this afternoon, and we were talking about how it might be done if folks want to have it, so that it's clearly sanctioned by the city, but not a Brown Act formal committee. And apparently if the city, Jeff can weigh in on this also, if the city manager is the person who selects the group or organizes the group, then it is not a Brown Act committee as opposed to the city council selecting the people. So that might be the other option, to have the informal meetings that would be necessary to move forward, but not, and have it be officially city sanctioned, but not, you know, too tied up.
totally, I think that sounds really good. I think that the sort of the deliverable at the end of the exercise, like what that's going to look like, I think I'd want to like talk about what that is, but that sounds great.
Yeah, and I was thinking also on that issue, because of figuring out what is the best way to organize the whole thing, that if we do vote to agendize this at a further time, that Kathy and Karen could meet and put the agenda item together for the future meeting about what exactly we're embarking on, and sort of they could hash out what would work and be helpful. So, other comments?
So I largely agree on the position on the lodge. I think that that's best left as a code enforcement piece, and I think that the lodge has been making steps definitely to improve the situation, and I'd rather that kind of get sorted out in the normal kind of course of things. But absolutely, people are welcome to engage with the neighbors on Clay Street, things like that, if they'd like to, and they're definitely making us aware of the situation that's going on there, and it seems like the lodge is taking it seriously, so I think that that's better handled in that manner. I really appreciate the work that and thought that Karen's put into this idea of bringing forward a recreation group and looking over at what are other cities of our size doing. I appreciate that it's focused on cities that have similar resources and similar sizes to us, so I think that that's really important and intelligent. And it's really a who's who of philanthropy and people who are leaders in this town and in this community that she's got already on board for this. So I think it's definitely something that I want to have happen, and really respect the work done there. Appreciate comments that I had, or conversation I had with Kathy this morning, city manager this morning, about not having it Brown Acted, which can get in the way of kind of free-flowing conversation and things like that. So I think it is a better way to go if we can have it not be a Brown Acted committee. So I'm supportive of that. You know, members of the public brought up things like a climate emergency, and while I see the emergency of that situation and things like that, I think it's important for us to get our climate sustainability person in first, allow them to kind of get their bearings, and then start to push on it. That's kind of my opinion on how those steps will run. But yeah, other than that, I don't have too many other comments. It seems like we've got a lot of things going on through the next couple months, and looking forward to it.
Councilmember Cook?
Well, I do like this process. I know that this is a new process for everyone, and but it makes sense because when you look at this, you have to remember the lights are on, water's in the spigots and all that. So this isn't just what the city council and staff is doing. These are just new things and things that we're continuing. So I like it. Talking about the lodge, I would support Mayor Harrington. I would like to see it to be an agenda item. I've gotten a lot of calls, what's going on down there, and I think with a lot of development that's happening in Sonoma, it would be good to take a look at that, especially what's happening in that area. So I would support that if Mayor Harrington wanted to move towards there. Karen Collins, you're so good at what you do. Thank you. This is great to bring it awareness. I spoke with Kathy earlier today on our 101 city manager, and just talking a little bit about what this looks like. And I think it's great. It probably doesn't have to be an agenda item. It could be because of the Brown Act. Everybody loves the Brown Act, but we always all try to get around it. So I would like to see that move because I think parks and recreation are so important. So thank you for bringing that, and Mayor Harrington. I think that's very important. And just kind of looking through here, some things. I was going to bring up one, but I decided not to because I know that we're full with a lot of things. But we do have a code enforcement out there, and I'm talking about the vaping. As you know, I've always been somebody who has been against vaping, and now if you see what's happening, I wanted to bring it towards an agenda item, but the reason I decided not to is because our code enforcement is doing such a great job looking at that and trying to figure out, we have the laws in place, we just need enforcement, and we need to have the state level, which it sounds like they're coming, and the federal level, take a look at that and decide what's going to happen with the whole vaping. So I won't be bringing that up, but that will change in the next quarter if I don't see a lot of movement on that. But looking here, staff, you're going to be busy, so I appreciate it. So when you look at this, this is not all we do. There's a lot more out there that we're continuing on. So thank you.
Great. Councilmember Agrimonti?
Sure, thank you. You know, I support you as well on the lodge. I'll tell you, First Street West, now that we're working on that, and I'm sure, I can't remember if Ms. Ferguson was here with one of those first meetings. It was in here, very contentious. I don't even know how, I think the subject has changed because everybody was in love with the eucalyptus trees. So I think that's over with, possibly. So that's a huge issue. That went beyond code enforcement. That went beyond all of that. One of the things I think I was told a long time ago, being on the city council, is that we have the key to the gate. Not many people from the public have the key to the gate. We are the ones that can open up the gate. And I think really taking a look at the lodge is very important to me. And I think that, you know, it's a shame that this county doesn't have conflict resolution programs, but I think that this would be a wonderful situation. I won't get into the details, but you know, there's good and bad issues on both sides, but I still support that. I think that's really very important, as I said, and the lodge, and you know, First Street West was pretty contentious. I'm so happy now with it, the way it's moving forward. And you know, some of our biggest issues are really the slowest ones. The Casa Grande thing, oh my God. I think we could shoot a satellite off of this Sonoma rather than get that fixed. But I understand our new senior management has been assigned to work on this issue, which I really appreciate because I'm sort of getting tired of thinking about it. The other thing, of course, one thing I'd like to know, and I don't know, I have to ask the city attorney, there were comments made about Climate Action 2020. Can I go back to that earlier? And what I'd like to say, there were 22 elements that were passed on that, and there were only 4 mentioned that we're not doing well on. So, woohoo! I think we should be very proud about that. And the other thing is, I agree with you on the vaping. I spoke to, I think the city manager may have handed that out to everyone. We passed that in 2015, and this Wednesday I'm going to be going to the high school meeting of the new principal, and also continue to work with the risk program. But I think those are things that are really important, and I appreciate all the hard work, and thank you, Karen. The comments regarding you are right on. And but as I said, I support just being able to sit down and listen to, you know, that's all people want to do is feel value. They feel valued, and so I support you, Madam Mayor.
Great. And so I already made some comments, but just some additional comments. On the lodge, obviously there's a difference between a hearing on it and receiving a report, and the idea that I'm putting forward is to receive a report so that we know what's going on, and also if the neighbors have things that they want to add to that report through public comment, or the lodge wants to make public comments, that we can have a forum to have that happen. So, and then the second item, Karen, thank you so much for your presentation and all your good work. And it looks like we will be moving forward with this item, I assume. And I look forward to seeing all the good things you can do. I did want to note, just for everybody on the timeline, I spoke to Karen about how long they thought it would take, because I wasn't imagining this as a something we could get done by the end of this year. We could agendize forming the committee, but not the work of the committee. And so this isn't this is something I wanted to bring forward to get the ball rolling, but this isn't something that's going to require a tremendous amount of work from the city staff in 2019.
So thank you, council. So what I'm hearing is a majority's interest in having a report back from the lodge within this kind of 90-day quarterly agenda. So we will work on bringing that back. And then on the recreation, I also hear unanimous support to work with Karen Collins and this idea of having a citizens task force to look at recreation. Following up on your suggestion, Mayor Harrington, what I'd like to do would be meet with Karen, kind of scope it out. She's clearly got some pieces already and a lot of very, smart and committed folks that are already investing in recreation and parks in our community. So for us, I think part of what I like to do is kind of work with her and kind of how that gets scoped. I can't see her now, looking for her face. There she is. And kind of tighten that, look at the scope, and then also kind of talk about timing. And it's great having some interns to help. My experience with these types of things is there still is some staff work that will be needed, and maybe there is some coordination. So I just want to kind of get some really clear parameters, but I think we can bring you back something and talk about a kind of a timeline and what that could look like.
Wonderful. Thank you. And that is all for this item. On to item 6.2, discussion and possible direction to city staff regarding the Depot Park First Street West frontage and drainage improvement project. And I will turn it over to our city manager and our public works director / city engineer.
Great.
Colleen.
And just council, we are having we've tried both laptops and neither's working. So we have hard printed for this next item we've got for the presentation. And are those in front of each of them? Okay. So if you want to refer, as Colleen Ferguson, our Public Works Director and City Engineer, provides you an update about the Depot Park First Street West Frontage Improvements Project. And so I'll turn it to her.
Mayor Harrington, members of the City Council, do you all have a copy of the PowerPoint in front of you? Because I'll be referring to it as I go since we can't see it on the screen. And
Yes.
I appreciate Erica handing it out to the public. Did we get enough copies back here? Okay, great. So moving on from the cover slide to slide 2. So the issue that we're talking about here with this project is really drainage. So water falls in the watershed above the mountain cemetery, and this is right here. So we can all close our eyes and picture it, right? Water's falling in the hills. It flows down through mountain cemetery. If you're parking to walk the Overlake Trail, the kiosk there, you can see the water flowing behind between the kiosk area and the Veterans Cemetery. And then it goes around the bend, and someplace along there it enters a 54-inch diameter pipe. So we're talking 54-inch diameter, big pipe. And that's why you don't see a drainage along the side of the road from there all along Arnold Field, past the Veterans Building, really all along Arnold Field until you get past the driveway to Depot Park and the parking lot for Arnold Field. The water is all in this huge pipe to that point. And then it flows under a boardwalk that you can see there near the bike path at Depot Park. And then it comes out of this huge pipe into this little teensy drainage channel along the frontage of Depot Park. And then it had gone through a 36-inch culvert at the south end of Depot Park that is smaller now, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So that's the drainage situation that we have out there. So moving on to page 3. So what happens is we have that much water coming down the hill that needs a pipe this big, and it's trying to get into fit into this little drainage channel, and it just doesn't fit. And so it ends up flowing along the edge of First Street West and flooding the roadway. And this happens even in really small storms because the channel is so small now because the eucalyptus tree roots have really taken over that channel. And it gets worse each year as the trees mature even further. And so why is this important? It's important because people need to travel along First Street West. It's not intended to be a creek. It's intended to be a travel corridor for the community. And people travel along First Street West day and night in any weather to get to a city council meeting, or to get to the Haven, or to get to events at the Veterans Building, or burials that happen at the Veterans Cemetery or the Mountain Cemetery. Or to their homes and businesses. This is why we have drainage facilities, public drainage facilities, to take care of that water that falls and that runs off the land when it rains, keep it safely off the travel ways so that people can travel around on the roads. And then moving on to slide 4, we got a surprise March 16th this last spring when a sinkhole formed in the pathway at the south end of Depot Park. That little pathway was put there originally because there was a dumpster at that south end of Depot Park that needed to be serviced by a garbage truck. And so a 36-inch diameter corrugated metal pipe was put in the drainage way, and that allowed access to that dumpster. The dumpster's gone now. The corrugated metal pipe rusted all the way through. A sinkhole formed at the surface, and Public Works crews went out and did temporary repairs at the pathway. But since the dumpster's not there, the pathway's really not needed anymore, and the temporary repairs meant sliding an even smaller pipe inside of the 36-inch pipe. So if we can remove all that, that would provide more capacity for the water to flow through there and make it more sustainable for this next winter. So then moving on to slide 5, this is just a reminder that we do have this project in the capital improvement program, so it was something that was discussed during the budget process, and knew that this would be coming forward as it is now. Now moving on to slide 6, just talking about the proposed project overall. So it means removing that culvert at the pedestrian crossing.
We don't have a slide 6.
Oh, you don't have a slide 6?
I don't.
So there's a page that
Oh.
has capital improvement program at the
Number 5.
top. Oh, I'm sorry. There's page numbers and then there's slide numbers.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Sorry.
So slide 6 starts talking about the overall proposed project. So removing the culvert where the sinkhole formed and that pedestrian crossing. Removing the 4 eucalyptus trees and then the roots from those trees. The importance of removing the trees now is because we're outside the bird nesting season. If we wait till spring or summer next year, we'll be in the bird nesting season. So this is the time to bring the trees down, then drill with the roots next summer. Enlarge the drainage channel to reduce flooding is one of the major goals. Stabilize the channel banks along the Depot Park frontage. Want to acknowledge that drainage way is a wetland. We've had an expert out and they've looked at it and determined that is a wetland, so we need quite a bit of permit resources applied and permits granted from resource agencies to be able to do the work in the channel. So that will be part of what needs to be done before we can do extensive work in the channel. So moving on to slide 7, there would be a planting of trees in Depot Park. And so there's trees right now between the picnic area and the drainage way and First Street West. So new trees would be planted in there, and vegetation would be planted along the drainage channel. The pathway that goes along the edge of Depot Park and right now goes out to the edge of First Street West would be reconstructed, so that pathway would just go to the picnic area that's there now, if you can picture that. The existing boardwalk south of the bike path along the frontage where the water flows now would be retained, so we wouldn't be proposing to remove that historic feature. So that's the project overall that would be done in 2 phases, and I'll get to that in a moment. But for now, let's go on to slide 8. So last Tuesday, September 10th, starting at 5:30, we had a public meeting in Depot Park. I was really impressed. The neighbors came out, had a great conversation with them about how they felt about the whole project. About 15 people. Most of the people that came were from the adjacent neighborhood. A super majority of the attendees support the project, including removing the 4 eucalyptus trees. Although we all love trees, sometimes it's time for a change, and the trees are really impacting the the drainage there, and the people that live there know about that. They see the flooding, they experience the flooding, they see the need to do something before it gets even worse in that little drainage channel. And so they also support removing the existing undersized culvert and enlarging the drainage channel. Now, people did express concern about downstream flooding, so we're right now just talking about the frontage of Depot Park. As the water goes downstream from Depot Park, first it encounters a culvert at a driveway, which has the same carrying capacity as that 54-inch diameter culvert upstream. So that one's not a concern as far as backing up flow and causing flooding. But as the water continues on down, it gets to what we call the Webb Grate. I forget how the Webb Grate name came about, but there's a grate there at the downstream end of this drainage channel, and part of what clogs it is the bark from the eucalyptus trees, so that will help with the clogging that happens at that grate, but the grate will continue to be a challenge. So this doesn't address that. We could bring forward ideas for addressing that in a future capital improvement program and have a project for council consideration there. The other thing that was brought up is some people love to just walk across the channel right where that pedestrian crossing is, where the dumpster had been. You know, it's easy to get to a bocce game, say, from your house across the street with that little crossing there versus walking to the bike path crossing and crossing First Street West there. So people would like the city to possibly consider a project to put a new pedestrian crossing in at the location of the existing one. And that's another request that could be considered as part of a future capital improvement program. Moving on to slide 9. So, like I mentioned, this can't all be done at once. We need permits to do significant work in the drainage channel. So what's being proposed is over the next month, remove the culvert where the sinkhole happened, remove that pedestrian crossing, remove the tops of the eucalyptus trees. Then get all the permits that we need, come back and address the eucalyptus tree roots, the drainage channel improvements, and the plantings in Depot Park. And then in the future, as we go into future CIPs or capital improvement programs, to bring forward ideas to address the downstream flooding and to replace the pedestrian crossing if the council would like to consider that. So our recommendation is for the council to direct staff to proceed with the project frontage and storm drain improvements along Depot Park at First Street West. I'd be happy to answer. And then on slide 10, what you see there is a visual simulation of what that area could look like with the eucalyptus trees removed, new trees planted, and just generally what it could look like along the drainage channel. Knowing that a lot of details still need to get worked out before we get to the point of building something, but this is just to help visualize not having the big eucalyptus trees there, basically. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I'm sure there's people from the public here to address the council as well.
Councilmember Cook?
Yeah, I have a question. This came to the council a long time ago as a grant that we had looked at. When you're saying projects downstream, as we know, anything that comes this way affects the whole city of Sonoma. They were talking about MacArthur, where all this water would come down. How would the engineering of this, would that affect down by MacArthur?
No. So this water that comes from the watershed we're talking about, it's open in a pipe, open again, in a pipe again, and it ends up in Friar Creek. The creek that jumps the banks and flows through MacArthur and floods down Broadway last winter
I'm actually talking
Nathanson Creek.
Yeah, I'm actually talking about on the west side. Because
where
the last discussion, it is Friar Creek.
Oh, I'm sorry. That end of MacArthur.
But I said
I'm
MacArthur,
sorry.
I meant MacArthur Avenue.
I'm sorry. I'm accustomed to where Nathanson Creek crosses MacArthur near MacArthur Place.
I'm
this
talking
is the
about
other part of MacArthur.
Yeah, because I know there was a discussion a little bit. Is there any engineering that's got to go down in that place due to this project?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Agrimonti?
Thank you so much. This is, it's so nice to be here at this place. So I was looking at the possible future consideration because I think well, you mentioned the sizes of the pipes, but down at First Street West is where, I don't even know if that well, we're going into winter, aren't we? But I know that, I don't know if it's customarily happens every year, but I know it's been pretty bad at that intersection where Girl and the Fig and the Plaza is, so hopefully that's what I'm sure that's what you're addressing there.
The grate is the issue for that, and that would
Right.
be a future project.
But I mean, a capital improvement program?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that you feel would eliminate any issues down at First Street West?
Not the project that's before the council right now.
But possibly this capital improvement?
A future project that we could consider in a
Okay.
future capital improvement program could.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Maybe just to add one item to that, I think where when we have flooding downtown, that generally occurs when that grate gets blocked. And so when that grate's blocked, then downtown backs up. As soon as that grate is open, downtown is fine. So literally, like in 10 minutes, it can go from localized flooding in downtown to empty. So keeping that grate free not only affects the neighbors on First Street West, but also affects downtown. So that's part of the vision is this in the future, we need to do some improvements to that grate. But that is not part of this project. The one piece that is part of what blocks that grate is some of the eucalyptus.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I have a question. How old are these trees?
I don't know. I know they have been topped before. So, the tops of them were cut down, and I wasn't here for that, and I don't know how old the trees are.
I mean, it looks to me they're like 100 years old. No idea. What trees would replace these trees?
That has not yet been determined, so we may have another conversation later about the exact species of trees that would be ideal to go in that space. I would think they'd be park-suitable trees and trees that would keep good visual access between people traveling on the bike path and on First Street West and people enjoying the park.
But do you have an idea about what size they would be?
Hasn't been determined yet. I'd love to have input from the community and the council on that.
Is there a possibility that because it's a wetland, that the permits will not be approved after the trees are chopped down?
I think that is very unlikely. We have a great consultant team working on this, and we'll be able to work with the resource agencies to address their needs and obtain the permits that we need.
Well, why would the trees be chopped down before you get the permits, just in case you're not able to get them?
The reason, I don't have concerns that we won't be able to get the permits. I just want to make that clear. It's a conversation with the resource agencies, and they'll ask us, we need to reach agreement on what we're going to plant along the channel and how we're going to do the work in the channel, how we're going to maintain it as a wetland into the future. If we were proposing to just plunk a pipe in there and eliminate the wetland, I'd have more concerns about getting permits, but that's not what we're proposing to do. We're proposing to provide adequate drainage and maintain the wetland. So that's why I can say that I'm not concerned about getting the permits, but the reason to cut the trees down now, the work in the channel really needs to be done during the dry season. The trees need to be cut down outside of the bird nesting season.
And can this is really a creek that's been partially undergrounded, right?
It's underground along the Vets building in Arnold Field, and the driveway to Depot Park, and then it's a wetland and an open channel, and then it's back underground for quite a while, and then it's open again at MacArthur.
Are there any other options that were considered besides cutting these trees down?
There could be options considered to take the pipe that exists now and bring the water under First Street West and connect the dots, maybe have an overflow to keep some water going in but it could only be the amount of water that can fit in a drainage channel that gets smaller every year as the eucalyptus trees grow. So it would be a carefully engineered system to bring the runoff from the hill that's in this 54-inch diameter pipe and carry that under First Street West in a big pipe that goes all the way through past to where this grate is. So it would be quite an expensive project, and we don't know if it would fit. There's sewer lines and water lines and all that in First Street West as well, and how it would impact the amount of water flowing in the drainage channel that's there. So that's the other option that could be considered. It didn't seem like there was community support for that, so we didn't pursue it much.
And can the channel be made just deeper? I mean, I did look at it. Can it be made wider or deeper instead of chopping down the trees?
Well, the trees are actually growing in the channel.
Yeah, I went and saw it.
Yeah, okay. So really, we can't increase the size of the channel without impacting the trees to the point where the risk of them toppling over and causing severe damage or killing someone is too high.
Okay. And then for the drainage, the gate or whatever it's called, that's the primary cause of the flooding, the gate?
The grate?
The gate, whatever you were calling it,
So at the downstream end of this drainage channel, so as you're getting closer to the Girl and the Fig, where there's First Street West with sidewalk and curb and gutter on both sides, and then there's First Street West on the east side that has a drainage channel, right? Right at that transition, there's a big pipe, and it's the size pipe where you wouldn't want a child to fall in and get swept downstream. So there's a grate. There's something to catch a person or a dog if they happen to be in the drainage channel, but it also catches eucalyptus bark and all kinds of things that wash down from the hill. That's what clogs the grate.
that was my question. So the cause of the flooding is the grate.
The cause of the flooding at the Girl and the Fig and such is the grate. The cause of the flooding along First Street West at Depot Park is the very small size of the drainage channel there.
And how often does it flood?
Every time it rains very hard.
Okay. Those are all my questions. Thanks. Do you have questions? Vice Mayor Harvey.
I don't have too many questions. When I toured this site with, I believe you and or at least a couple of members of Public Works, and I was informed that there's a certain amount of danger to Public Works when trying to clean this grate out, which happens every time it floods. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, anybody who's carried a bucket of water knows the water is very heavy, and or stood in waves in the ocean or a stream, it has a lot of force, water does. And so when that water is coming down the drainage channel and trying to get through the grate, and the crews are there trying to clear this debris from the grate, you said, it's very impressive. The water is flowing up and over and down into downtown Sonoma, and our folks are out there at night, typically in the pouring down rain, with whatever tools they can get to try to clear the debris off this grate. And once that happens, the water just sucks right back down into the grate, and it stops overflowing into downtown. So it's tricky and can be dangerous work.
The fear that was expressed to me was that there could be a time where somebody could fall as this grate is opening up. The water pressure would basically pin them against the grate, and there's a potential that somebody could be seriously injured or lose their lives. So this is a project that I think is really important that we get right, just from a public safety standpoint, and for our staff members who are out there in the rain taking care of the community.
Thank you.
Okay. If there are no other questions, I will open it up to the public for public comment.
Patricia Cullinan. I want to make good use of my time here. I wanted to remind the council that in the previous iteration of this plan, there was a proposal to completely underground this historic creek. This is a historic drainage area, and as the city engineer said, that it's an established wetland. So I think that the plan that they proposed is really wonderful. It maintains the creek and does the job that we need for drainage in the city of Sonoma. So I'm totally in support of it, and I was part of that meeting, and the eucalyptus trees over the years that I've been using the bike path have grown further into the creek. You know, water when you're young, and I was young here, is really enchanting. So but the flooding down the street isn't so much fun, and that's the situation that's been created. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, resident Bill Spencer. I live at 319, my home is at 319 First Street West, next door to the Cooperage building towards the plaza. And it's been a handful of floods that have jumped the street to go over to the other side and flood my whole property. In fact, one time it flooded the entire property terribly. It went in a door near the front and a door near the back and went inside the house. It was a horrible, horrible thing that took weeks to get cleaned up. And so I put up these sandbags all the way through across my front yard, except not crossing my driveway. And I actually had 2 of them stacked high, all the way. And it's still flooded. It would go down the driveway and flood. So I had bags in front of my doors on the outside, which I still have. And it's really been terrible. I've had about 4 to 5 terrible floods down there. And there's other ones that they'll just come down the driveway for a while and that sort of thing. So it's really been a horrible thing for me. And it jumps the creek there, and one of the places it's jumping is when it gets near the driveway after the eucalyptus trees, Dunlap driveway there. So anyway.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. It's helpful to understand the neighborhood
Thank you.
perspective.
Ooh.
Good evening, Mayor Harrington and council members. I'm Jim Bohar. I live at 299 First Street West. This could be a little redundant from what you may have seen from me this morning, but perhaps repetition is the soul of persuasion. My wife and I live across the street from the historic seasonal Friar Creek, and it's home to cattails, flowers, and that charming chorus of frogs, which is really something in the springtime. We view the creek as a significant amenity to our quaint backstreet atmosphere. The majority of the buildings fronting on the creek are historic and built prior to 1900. We recognize that it's unfortunately necessary to remove the 4 eucalyptus trees. However, as we have heard before, the roots are the main cause of the overflowing. I'll skip over the part about the flooding. I think you've all heard quite enough about that. However, another potentially more lethal issue was evidenced in the 2017 fires. The fires on that Friday night of the bad fire week were coming directly from the east in the middle of the night when the sky lit up pink, and it was heading right for my front door and all the homes along First Street West. There's a bank of eucalyptus trees by the bocce courts which have been trimmed, but they're still very thick. And if that fire had been augmented by a higher wind, it likely would have gotten that far and set all those trees on fire, and they would have clearly sent a lot of flaming debris over to ignite these 4 trees that are going to be removed. And if that happened, it would just wipe out all those historic farmhouses along First Street West, including mine. I want to add that the Public Works Director, colleague Ferguson, has been quite visible and available to all of us and myself to discuss the interests of the neighbors in the project. We enthusiastically support the current proposal from the Public Works Department, the Depot Park First Street West Frontage Improvement Project. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Jim.
Hello, Mayor Harrington and the City Council. My name's Peter Mathis. I live right across from the proposed project at 287 First Street West. I just wanted to say that I have a passionate attachment to the pedestrian passageway that goes across the creek there. That's proposed to be removed permanently in this project. So I would just like to tell you that I think that park is a wonderful asset, very highly utilized space in our community. One of the most successful small parks I've ever seen, actually, for how many people get in there and use it. And I think the access, the multiple pathways to access it is part of its success, and it allows people to spread out really nicely within the park. So I would encourage you to find within the scope of this project, should you go forward with it, try to replace that rather than remove the bridge, that pedestrian bridge, if we're clear what it is. And just as an aside, I personally like the trees and would prefer that they stay. I see that there's not a lot of support for that, but I just wanted to let you know I love them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello again, Fred Allebach, 19550 Street East. I have a question for staff, is that I believe that there was a water agency grant program that had 3 options that would have solved this particular problem. And I remember one of the options was to like dig up the veterans parking lot and have a groundwater recharge chamber there, and then sort of a lesser version of that. And I think there was one about this creek channel, and that would have all been free grant money. And so I just wanted to find out what the history of that was and why those didn't get chosen at that time, so why we're here now.
Thank you, Fred. Anyone else? Okay, with that, I will close public comment, and if someone has that history in response to Fred's question.
I actually don't have a lot of history. I do know that this was quite a community conversation before my time and before Colleen's time. I think a couple of council members may have been on, but my understanding is that there was not community consensus in terms of moving forward with the proposal as it was scoped, and that grant money then went to Petaluma.
Yeah, I can answer that question when it comes to my turn to vote, or I could say it now. It was there was a public outcry on that grant, and that grant money ended up going to Petaluma. It didn't stay here, and it was because the council at that time listened to the locals, including myself, because I voted with the majority of the council, and I don't know what the vote was, but it was the different plans weren't acceptable to the people that lived on First Street West. So I think the council did a great job with their vote that night.
So just to add to that, in case people were wondering, what were the plans? My understanding of the plans for addressing the flooding issue, and from an engineering standpoint, it makes all kinds of sense, right? You got the watershed, you got a pipe, and you got an open channel, and then you got another pipe. You just connect the dots, right? Can put a little surface swale, to have some frog habitat or whatever. But that was basically the proposal, to eliminate the drainage channel next to First Street West, put it underground, have enough right of way then to put a pedestrian path, a sidewalk along that side of First Street West, and a little surface swale that would have gone along there, and some storage under the Veterans Building parking lot, which is, of course, is not city property. So I think in addition to the community outcry, which the council responded to, the people who own the Veterans Building land said no to that as well.
All right, thank you. I'll take it back to the council for discussion.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, thank you, Madam Mayor, to bring that up, because I just spoke with Bob Piazza the other day, and I think he was right in the middle of that many years ago. He just blew when I think that issue was discussed. I have to say, I heard Mr. Bohar say that he enjoyed the frogs. I think there are frogs there. Okay. Well, when I first moved here, I thought they were a weird bird. And so somebody from that block, I called them and said, "What kind of birds do you have here?" And they said, "Those are frogs, my dear." So now I'm just, growing and doing really well now. But I just think it's kind of funny to hear that those, I don't know, they sounded like birds to me. So I really support this. It's one of those things, that have moved along, and I think it's really important for us to finally deal with it, and it was huge. I mean, not even just this drainage issue, but the whole veterans issue was very big. So that's going back quite a few years ago. And I think if we did anything different, Bob Piazza would come back from Idaho and talk to us about it again. But I really support this project.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Harvey?
I'll also be voting in support of this project. I think that removing some of the debris that clogs that drain will be a positive thing. I think it's sad to lose huge eucalyptus trees always, and I want to be sure that we are getting replacement trees that'll be very sizable, and I'd prefer that they be native. If we can get native trees, I would really prefer it. I'm glad we're keeping the drainage ditch open. I think the creeks are really kind of an asset in Sonoma. I grew up here and caught a lot of tadpoles along the bike path, so I think that's always kind of a nice thing to see running water and kind of remember the nature in that way. Yeah, so I'm supportive of this. I think removing the flooding that's been affecting, obviously, some people's property very, very seriously is going to be a positive thing for that neighborhood and also for further along at the plaza as well. So if we can keep our public works out of the rain a little bit this year, that would be nice.
Well, you can go ahead. Councilmember Hundley? I can go last. Oh. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that this matter will pass tonight. I don't actually support it. I think, we do a lot of talk about climate change, and then you're going to chop down trees, and we didn't even take the time to find out how old they are. I think that it's great to preserve history, and that our natural history is part of our history as well. In terms of other options that have been considered, it sounds to me like I just have to imagine that many other cities face a problem of a drain that gets regularly clogged, and that there are solutions that can be applied here. I know I've seen some nets that you can attach to drains, which can be regularly changed so that you collect all the debris that flows through them. I think that would be step one. I also think that it would be superior to obtain the permits to work in a wetland prior to chopping down the trees. And perhaps we all have our particular issues, but I think chopping down very mature trees is a bad idea. And I'm not convinced that other alternatives, especially with regard to the role of the drain, the gate in front of the drain in terms of improving the flow, has been addressed. And certainly if the water backs up right on the plaza, that's going to cause flooding above it. So I would prefer to see that issue resolved first, but it sounds like it will pass, and I think that's good for the neighbors who want that. And I understand that regular flooding is very difficult, and I have the creek right behind my house, and it overflows its banks regularly and comes up to my house, and all of us get together who live right behind the creek, and we're very worried about what we would do. And I understand the anxiety and also the difficulty of trying to protect your house. So I understood your comments and I appreciate them, but I don't support this project. Councilmember Cook.
Yeah, I'll be supporting this project tonight, and I just want to thank staff for the hard work. I know that this has come to the council before in a bigger grant proposal, and I liked what you said, because that's what it was. Is it would have been piping that whole creek, and everyone, I think, on First Street West, maybe there was one or two might have not liked it, but or would have liked it, but the majority was that they liked the frogs, and we have to respect that and everything. And probably the biggest thing that could come out of here tonight is we're not chopping down a native species. We're talking about eucalyptus trees, which I don't want to vote for chopping down trees that are beneficial, but I really do believe these trees are not beneficial, and would be supporting this project because of that.
And I am pleasantly surprised that we are here at this peaceful resolution of this issue, because when it was here prior, and I think it was an issue where there was like a lot of money on the table and a very short timeline and trying to scramble, and then people thinking they had a brilliant solution to a problem, but not really understanding the community and the context and the history of the area. But these trees, we talked about cutting them down back then, and I think had we done that, it probably would have saved ourselves some problems. And you know, I see a real opportunity for Depot Park, because the picnic area right behind that, it doesn't have the best shade, and as the lone member of our city parks subcommittee, we've talked about different ways we can get more shade in there so it's more enjoyable and usable. And you know, I see a huge opportunity coming out of this as we look to Depot Park to make that improved also. And for the pedestrian access, you know, I think that could be a part of it too. I would want certain pedestrian considerations to be a part of it too, like the fact that we have an interest with no crosswalk right now, and there's not a sidewalk on that side of the street. But I think as we look at the whole park as a big picture, and without these trees, I think that we'll be even thinking about this park even more. So I'm happy to be supporting this, and I really appreciate the work the staff has put in, and I appreciate the comments of the neighbors and coming out to talk about this. And it's nice to know that we can help address this issue that's been quite serious in a way that we can still keep our creek. So thank you all.
Is there a motion?
Motion to approve item, what is it, 6.1? 6.2? 6.2.
Second.
Oh, sorry.
Roll call?
Councilmember Agrimonti?
Aye.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Harvey?
Yes.
Mayor Harrington?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
Thanks. And I would just like to take a 3-minute break. We are on to item 6.3. Discussion and direction on future structure, selection process, and role of the city historian position and appointment of a council subcommittee. And I will turn it over to the city manager and the city clerk.
Great, thank you, Mayor Harrington, members of the council and community that are here with us. So if council recalls, back in 2008, the position of city historian was created to, quote, assist the city in coordinating the preservation of historical records and resources and maintaining a link between the city's past, present, and future. And a copy of the original the resolution is attached. In November, we've had 2 folks that have served in this capacity, George McHale and Robert Demler, since it was created in 08. And in November 2018, council discussed kind of roles and responsibilities and asked us to come back with kind of some more information and to get some direction. So we've gone out and looked at some different models, and frankly, there are some choices. And before we spend any more time, I'd like some council direction. So in terms of other structure, there's definitely a range, and I actually been surprised maybe the number of cities, maybe not in California, that really do have some kind of a city historian. Some of them are actually city volunteer positions. In bigger cities like Sacramento, it is a paid, kind of department head or a paid management level position. And then in other places, it looks to me, it's unclear, but it looks like to me it's done by a local nonprofit, maybe with city sanction and approval, or maybe just as part of their effort. So in terms of structure, there are some options. One is kind of retain this as a city volunteer position. 2 would be contract with a nonprofit to serve that role. Or 3, maybe just there's no formal and a nonprofit kind of plays that city historian role with no involvement in the city. If we are going to have some kind of, if it ends up being a contract, then I would see this probably more like your recreation community services contract. Maybe you're asking someone to do a scope of work with maybe some kind of small amount of compensation or something, and that could be a structure, kind of that model. Your other option, though, is if it stays with a volunteer position. The last time we talked about it, there did seem to be consensus from the council about having this be a full city council appointment process, having gone back through the notes. But there would be options there. You could have the council select, you could have the mayor and vice mayor interview and recommend. You could have no interview and just the council selects where council's looking at an application, so that's another way. Or again, you could go to the model we had for a while on a number where the mayor interviews and recommends and the council ratifies. So whatever you decide to do here, if it's a volunteer position, we want to take that and update our kind of commission appointees. One of the areas that we had quite a bit of conversation in November was kind of the roles and responsibilities, and there are a variety of different roles. And I think this is a place where we still need some work once you decide what structure you want, and that's part of the reason I'm recommending maybe a subcommittee. That I don't think this would be maybe one meeting, maybe 2, to put kind of, if you decide to go forward with a volunteer. And really kind of scope out. And I attached the city of Gilroy. I liked their model, maybe not necessarily for some of the specifics, but I think it really did provide clarity about what the responsibilities were and also what it wasn't. Because sometimes a role description just need to be clear. We want you to do this, but we're not asking you to do this. Because sometimes in the absence there can be confusion. So there are a number of different items. We could upgrade the 08 scope, depending on who you want to do it, or how you want to structure it. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions and turn it back to the mayor.
Great. I really want to compliment the staff on this work. It's really interesting to see the different programs that are out there. Are there other councilmember questions?
I just one. I'm really glad that this has come before the city council. I just think it's time that we actually, I remember Councilmember Hundley talking about Charleston, and this is really a very historic city, and people come here for a lot of different reasons. It would be another way to draw people here, which I think is important, so I hope that we're able to move forward in some way. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? No? I'll open it up to the public for public comment.
Patricia Cullinan. I'm hoping that the council looks at option 2. In looking at the previous description of the city historian, the Sonoma Valley Historical Society has actually fulfilled all those roles in various capacities. We're non-political, and we do have archives. In the original description, the city itself was hoping to collect archives, which is a very specific job, and we are constantly receiving archival material from generous donors, you know, and that I don't really see the city as providing that service, you know, that we we're like a business, I guess you would say, in history and archival work. In talking to George McHale, he said originally when the city created this description, they thought that they actually had a lot more archival material than they actually did, and when they went to look, well, there wasn't as much as they thought there was. So there was no reason for the city to be in the archival business. And so I think that also one of the advantages, and this is sort of like what Karen was talking about, having kind of a separate group, is that the Historical Society, we're partnering with the California State Library to have material from the archives digitized about Sonoma history. So that even brings more interest outside and more more focus on the history of the city of Sonoma. So that's just my my wish, is that I think that having an organization to do this, we've discussed it in our organization, and a little bit, you know, because you guys are the lead, and we would have a group of historians that would work on, you know, to respond to the needs of the city. Right now, our collections manager, Lori Fulton, she answers questions. The chamber sends us people, the Visitors Bureau, and actually the city has sent us people that have inquiries. So we're kind of already doing it in a way, and I think that it would be a good partnership with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, Kate Schertz, on the Board of Directors for the Historical Society, former chair of the Cultural and Fine Arts Commission. The point I'd like to make is that the scope of what we consider the history of Sonoma and Sonoma Valley is huger than anyone can imagine. I just finished curating a show at the museum called Treasures from the Attic. From the tens of thousands of objects that we have, we picked just 45 to represent the kinds of things that we have, from documents to deeds to maps to land frauds to paintings to photographs to stuff we call ephemera in museum in terminology. And right now I'm putting together a show called Baseball in the Valley. It's so huge, and we've had so many people give us so much stuff that we're going to have to break it into 2 parts for the show. So when you're talking about a history function, it can't reside in one person. It has to be a collaborative effort of a group of people who have different sets of skills and things that they bring to the table. And that's what we have in the Historical Society. Each person who's on the board has a kind of expertise, a kind of background that makes the board as a total body function like a village, which is what we are. So I hope you'll consider option 2, which is vesting the Sonoma Valley Historical Society with the role of official historian of the valley. Thank you.
Thank you.
I used to be a member of the Sonoma Valley Historical Society board, and when I was there, when Bob Parmalee had his office there, when he was going there more, Bob showed me a document that was a 1910 liquor regulations on the plaza, and Jeff might be interested in this because it limited the number of liquor serving institutions to 10 on the plaza only, and there was no dancing allowed either. So You know, so I wonder, you know, at what time do old regulations become historical documents? You know, it's interesting, you know, that stuff like that's happened, but it's very, there's so much interesting stuff there that if people get interested in the history here, it's something that doesn't cost you any money. You don't have to go and spend money to do it. You can go to the Marcy House, you can get into a project, and to stoke that kind of interest is good. So I'm all support of the city historian, and for somebody to work that position to get people interested. And so I've met Peter and Patricia and all these folks, and it's just really fun to be into it, and I'm glad that I got into it earlier in my Sonoma career, and now I've moved on to like housing and climate, but at one time I was a history guy, and it was really fun.
Thank you, Fred. Anyone else?
Susan Crutchfield, I'm a member of the board, and I am new to the board, and I just want to say that I am so impressed with what the Sonoma Valley Historical Board does, Society, and I hope that you will consider using us as a group. We have lectures that are all about the history and are well attended. We have all kinds of people that are working in different areas of history which bring it all together, and I very much support that Patricia does, and also that the others on the board hope for. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I will close public comment if no one else would like to address it, and I will open it up for council discussion. Councilmember Hundley.
Thank you. And thank you for reminding me of Charleston. I haven't talked about it in a while. So, Charleston, where I was born and grew up, it's one of the reasons that I really appreciated moving to the historic Sonoma, because I grew up somewhere that was very rich in history, and also a place where they did a great job preserving what they had, and then also celebrating it, and then also effectively making it a big part of their economy. And it's something that I think that Sonoma has not leveraged as much as it could, because our history is so special and it's so interesting. And I think we're lucky that we've had the Historic Society, you know, carefully caring for all of these artifacts and documents and things. But I think it's, you know, I'd love to see us somehow figure out how to kind of take things to the next level. And what's going on right now with our relationship with state parks is going really well, and it just seems that this could be a time where we get to be more outwardly expressive of our history. And I think that it does take an institution to really be able to do that, because it is a big job. And I do like the idea of having like a face for the historian, but for this purpose, for all of the reasons that the city historian position was created, I think it makes a lot more sense to contract with a nonprofit. Not only would that you know, help give us more resources in doing these things, I think that also the city supporting this kind of work is really important. And I don't know if there's some sort of model that could be imagined where there would be somebody every year, perhaps sort of not as officially, but kind of the person. I don't know. If there was, if someone had a creative idea where there could be someone that could be like, this is our city historian, and they're kind of backed up by a historic nonprofit organization, that would be cool. But more than that, with the education component, which the Historic Society is already doing, and also caring for all these things, it just makes a lot of sense. And I can see in bigger cities, having a larger population, having the structure where you have one person for 2 or 4 years, because you have lots of people to choose from, and maybe you'll have like lots of experts hidden away that might want to do this. But we're so small, we're just really dependent on, you know, the right person at the right time. And I kind of like the idea of going with the nonprofit organization. So that's what I'll be supporting tonight.
Councilmember Cook.
Well, I moved to Sonoma because of the history, and like they say, new history is made every day. I will be supporting option B. mainly because I believe that a nonprofit taking care of this, and I'll even kind of up the ante a little bit where I think that having that nonprofit come to the council once a year and just talk about what they have done with that. I think it's very important because a lot of individuals that live in Sonoma don't even understand what we have and where it's archived and what we have sitting in barns in different areas that I'm always afraid we're going to lose, because you're going to hear a barn caught on fire out in the country and you'll find out that we lost a lot of stuff. So I definitely think this is very important, and I'd like to see the option B where we contract with a nonprofit and move it forward and try to get more discussion about our history.
Vice Mayor Harvey?
I also support going with the Historical Society as our city historian. I think there's a broader capacity that they can bring because they'll have a multitude of individuals. The different skills mentioned by Kate was fantastic, and I think that's a really good point. I would like to have a broader discussion maybe about what the role is. I think if we have clearly defined kind of like expectations or ideas that we'd like to see done. I mean, I know myself personally, I would love to see an expansion of school programs and kind of really bringing the kids in there. That's something, growing up and going to public schools here, there was a heavy focus on the mission and on the gold rush, but you didn't learn so much of the other histories that existed in Sonoma. And I think there's a real opportunity to expand that program and do a lot there. I'd love just reading through what other city historians do in other cities, having those defined roles, I think is really good. The idea of, bringing, once a month, putting an article in the paper. I've learned some fascinating stories from Kelso Barnett, who kind of trawls through the old Sonoma Index Tribune articles. And I think that's a lot of fun to see, and I think it kind of livens the town, providing some sort of historical tours. I took a walk with Fred Allebach through the graveyard and just had a fantastic time and learned a ton. And so the more that we can provide those things, and the more that we can have specific roles and kind of have expectations, I think it'll be a better program. And I don't know what else to say on that. As far as appointing a specific person, maybe it's useful to have a specific person that we know is the city contact. But I think the Historical Society is going to do a great job with this. And I'm excited to see what comes of it.
Councilmember Agrimonti?
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting, the Women's Club, of course, has already started working with the Historical Society because of Patricia's expertise on fundraising. And so we have actually handed over our records from 1901 to 1960, and we plan to continue that. And what's so wonderful is that the women's suffrage anniversary is coming up, and I think the Women's Club, we're preparing for it, and I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity for us to hit on that. And as we've seen, and as I shared earlier, Charleston seems to understand how it works with respect to history, and this city really has a rich history that we don't even capitalize on. And so it would be great if we actually had a real focus for us, possibly even digitizing the records that we have as well. So thank you, and I do support B.
Well, I'm so glad we're having this discussion tonight, because I do think we've had this position, and although we had a definition, it was not always clear what the expectations were or how it would be carried out. So I think this is a great discussion to have. Both my daughters interned with Patricia, and that was really the first time I ever went into the Marcy house and looked myself a little bit at the ephemera, and I was very impressed with what's going on in there. And so I think option B is also good. I don't know what contract means with regard to financial consequences. Did you have something in mind, Kathy, or what did that mean to you?
I didn't with any great detail at this point. I mean, I think, the Historical Society their core duties is doing the, kind of the archiving piece. So the question really is, for us, are there additional public education pieces that we would like to have them do more? And I think it would take a little bit of maybe a meeting with Patricia to kind of scope that out a little bit, and maybe the subcommittee to be clear. So, because what is the additional work that we're asking for, and what does that look like, and then what would be a compensation? And obviously, we would need to look at that kind of overall within a some of the pieces that we're providing with other folks as well. So I see this, I think I see this as a modest, because this is kind of already within their core duties,
Yeah.
their core bailiwick. But I think the big thing it gives to the Historical Society, if council goes this direction, is that, again, like with our other recreation partners and community service partners, you know, there is this recognition of the city is a core sponsor. I mean, we're already a partner because a lot of our documents and records are there, but it formalizes them a little bit and it creates that connection. I do think I've seen, I think I mentioned to a couple of you, I've seen some other city-like regular newsletters, and a number of them that have historical communities will always have a little history question, and then they tell you the answer next time. Or so it can be a way to, I think, we could, with a partnership, do some things that without a partnership we couldn't.
Thank you. So I guess the other thing I was thinking is, I don't know, perhaps there's people that want to serve on a subcommittee, but if the Historical Society wanted to meet with their board and maybe come back to us with a proposal about what they thought was doable, I think that might be, that would be fine with me, and it would be very helpful since you know your operations and what you're able to do, and you have these examples. If you would come back to us, if there's people that want to be on a subcommittee, also fine.
And maybe this is one where we don't necessarily need a 2-member subcommittee. Could also be potentially, you know, one of you or something, or even the mayor. If it's going to go that direction, it could be simplified. So it kind of depends on what
I
you want.
myself would be comfortable with city staff working directly with the Historical Society, but however folks want to work on it.
I would serve on a subcommittee if there was one.
Okay.
Anybody wanted to? Subcommittee of one.
I'd be willing to jump in with you and do it. I think it would be interesting to talk about what would be possible to see the Historical Society do, and I think there's a lot of things that we could touch on and a lot of ways we could leverage it, and yeah, that'd be interesting.
So maybe we could ask them to work on a proposal for starters about what they think would be helpful and possible, and then meet with the subcommittee and start from there. That might be a good for openers. Okay, great. So, and then I guess, are we going to change our, not this evening, but ultimately we're going to change our resolution to reflect?
Well, I think the question would be, we may rescind the resolution and do a contract. If it moves that direction, that could be one outcome. I think I'd want to chew that through a little bit with the subcommittee, but if we are moving it kind of under our different umbrella of our recreation community services, that would be one direction. So I think I want to chew on that a little bit.
So that's part of the work then, is to figure out what that is. Okay, sounds good. All right. So then, do we need a motion or just direction, or?
A motion would be great with the appointment of the subcommittee. Thank you.
Does somebody want to make it?
Move to approve item 6.3 and using option B, which will be contracting with the Historical Society, making them our future historian or our future city historian, and then creating the subcommittee for the city historian, which will be myself and Councilmember Hundley.
Second.
That work?
I mean, I think it's clear that everybody wants the Historic Society at this time, but forward going, there would have to be a process so that if there were another group that wanted it, it would not, that our resolution won't just read, whatever it is, that it won't just read that it is a particular group. It's that we're going with option B. Step one is that we go with option B.
Okay, so move to approve item 6.3, directing city staff to contract with a organization to be our city historian, and approving the subcommittee of myself and Councilmember Hundley.
Second.
Oh, roll call. Thanks.
Councilmember Agrimonti?
Aye.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Harvey?
Yes.
Mayor Harrington?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
And I want to thank everybody who came to public comment and for your willingness to take on this work. And I think it's a good direction, and we look forward to what we'll see. Now on to item 6.4. Review and accept the City of Sonoma's fiscal year 2016-17 audited financial statement, governance letter, auditor's internal control letter, and responsible officials' responses, Assistant City Manager and City Manager. Hi, Sue.
Hi. So good evening, Mayor Harrington and council members. Tonight I'm really glad to be presenting the City of Sonoma's fiscal year 16-17 audited financial statements. And on August 13th, staff met with the City of Sonoma's Audit Committee to discuss the financial statements with Ingrid Scheiplein, managing partner of Richardson and Company, the city's financial auditing firm. At the meeting, the committee staff and auditor also discussed the audit governance letter, the auditor's internal control letter, and then the official responses to the auditor's control letter. After review and discussion with staff and the city auditors, the audit committee recommended that the audited financial statements, governance letter, internal control letter, and the official responses be presented to council for acceptance. So for each fiscal year, an independent audit of the city's financial statements is completed by an outside audit firm. And this is in compliance with generally accepted accounting standards and also the standards of the Government Accounting Standards Board, which is also known as GASB. And the government accounting standards also suggest hiring a new auditor every 3 to 5 years. So following the completion of the fiscal year 15-16 audit, the city conducted a request for proposal and hired Richardson and Company LLP as the city's new auditor to complete the 16-17 audited financials. So Richardson and Company conducted a necessary, thorough, and very comprehensive assessment of the city's financial practices as they completed the annual audit and the 16-17 financial statements. So for fiscal year 16-17, Richardson and Company issued an unmodified opinion of the financials, and an unmodified opinion is the highest level of assurance that an auditor can provide relative to the fairness and accuracy of the financial statements being presented. And an unmodified opinion means that the auditor has expressed an opinion that the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the City of Sonoma as of June 30th, 2017, in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles. So the preparation of the financial statement usually in the financial audit usually takes place over several months, and that process starts just after the end of the fiscal year and continues through when the books are closed and then when the audited financial statements are completed. For fiscal year 16-17, there were several major factors that significantly delayed this process. There was key staff turnover in January of 2017. The city manager and finance director both left the city at the same time. The close process and audit of the 15-16 audit had not been completed. And then the catastrophic fires that swept through the Sonoma Valley in October 2017 further delayed this critical work. And finally, there was insufficient staffing in the finance department for many months. So professional standards for auditors require that they advise the city on certain matters relating to the audit. And this includes a report on the city's internal control over financial reporting. Internal control is defined in accounting and auditing as a process for assuring that the city's objectives for reliable financial reporting, compliance with laws, regulations, and policies, operational effectiveness, and efficiency are achieved. A deficiency in internal control exists when the processes and procedures for management and or the employees in the normal course of performing their assigned functions do not allow the ability to prevent, detect, correct any misstatements in financial reporting on a timely basis. Two classifications of internal control deficiencies can be reported during a financial audit, and the first one is a material weakness, and this is a deficiency or combination of deficiencies in internal control where there's a reasonable possibility that a material misstatement of the city's financial statements may not be prevented or detected and corrected on a timely basis. And the second one is called a significant deficiency, and it always sounds worse than the material one, but it's actually the less deficiency. And it's a deficiency or a combination of deficiencies in internal control that is less severe than a material weakness, but it is important enough for the auditors to mention it to those charged with governance. So during the audit for the fiscal year 16-17, the auditors did identify certain deficiencies in internal control. that they considered to be either material weaknesses or a significant deficiency. This was not a surprise. So the material weaknesses that were identified by the auditors include the financial reporting and accounting system, capital assets, and interfund loans. So the 9 items that were noted under financial reporting, accounting, and system that were not reconciled or evaluated prior to the start of the audit were corrected with adjusting journal entries in fiscal year 16-17, and then balance sheet accounts will be properly reconciled and or evaluated prior to the start of audits going forward. Procedures for policies for capital assets disposal, inventory, and capitalization policies have been and are being worked on and were implemented in fiscal year 17-18 or will be implemented in 18-19 or 19-20 because we'll be bringing a policy forward for capitalization. So the interphone loan between the general fund and water fund has been posted in the general ledger, and it is noted in Note M on page 61 of Attachment B. As suggested, a formal loan agreement will be brought to council for approval probably in the next couple months. So the one significant deficiency noted was the use of a check signature stamp, and that was the mayor's signature stamp. And we just wanted to note that the use of the mayor's signature stamp was discontinued in January 2019. So then the auditors also made several other very useful recommendations to assist the city with improving its control over financial reporting. And the city wholeheartedly agrees with the findings of the auditor and has and is taking a number of steps to improve the city's financial management practices, including organizational restructuring. Having experienced in appropriate levels of personnel who are qualified for managing the accounting and reporting function of the city is very crucial. So just as a quick reminder, current management and finance division staff were not employed in fiscal year 16-17. So we consider 16-17 to be a cleanup year, where during the audit of the fiscal year, a significant amount of time was spent reconciling the city's 52 funds and the balance sheet accounts for each of those funds. Numerous adjusting journal entries had to be posted to properly record expenditures, revenues, and balance sheet items, and to correct some outstanding items discovered in the fiscal year 15-16 audit. And we believe that a majority of the cleanup work has been completed with the 16-17 audit, and then both the 17-18 and 18-19 audit will go much more smoothly. Also, the internal control items mentioned in the 16-17 audit should be non-existent or will show vast improvement by the time the fiscal year 18-19 audit is completed. So we're extremely satisfied and appreciative of the comprehensive and thoroughness of Richardson and Company's audit. And overall, the city's management team, led by Kathy Capriola, city manager, me, and Deputy Finance Director Jenna Burrows, are continuing to enhance the city's financial organization and best practices. We've made a lot of accomplishments over the last 2.5 years, and I was going to list them all, but I think you know them. And so just a couple of things. We have recruited and successfully appointed 3 key positions in the finance department. So we have a totally new team, and if I do say so myself, I have a fabulous team. And so the official response to the internal control letter is contained in Attachment D, Auditor's Internal Control Letter and Responsible Official Responses. And the responses detail all the steps the city has and is taking to correct the deficiencies identified by the auditor. It also contains the city's responses to the auditor's other recommendations. And I'm not going to go into the details of each item contained in that response in Attachment D unless you have specific questions now or following the auditor's presentation. But I did want to mention 2 adjusting journal entries for items discovered in fiscal year 15-16. And these items are noted on page 61 of Attachment B in Note M, Restatements. And so in fiscal year 16-17, during that audit, several funds were showing large deficit balances. The Employee Benefits Fund was a major one, and that was a separate fund set up for the payment of employee benefits, and it was funded by transfers from the general fund, and it was showing a deficit balance of $489,000. This deficit balance arose over several years because of insufficient transfers from the general fund to that fund. So it was reconciled, but no journal entry was posted in 1516 because we were just continuing to look at the fund and research what had happened. And that deficit fund balance is shown in 1516 audit. It's on the, it's just in the assigned reserve fund balance. So if you look back on that, it's on page 24 in the 1516 audit. So the fund was again reconciled in 1617, and a transfer of $489,000 from the general fund to the employee benefits fund was posted to remove the deficit fund balance. In 1718, the fund was reconciled with each payroll, so that wouldn't happen again. And in 1819, the employee benefits fund was totally discontinued, as all benefit expenses are now posted directly to the funds that have payroll. And in 1516, also the bids and deposits fund, which is used to record developer planning, engineering, as well as event deposits, was showing a deficit balance of $199,000. This account was reconciled in fiscal year 1617, where it was discovered, after extensive, painstaking research, that a prior year grant revenue posting was reversed from this liability account in error. And we actually had to go back to our old accounting system, MOMS, which is a very flat system, and so we had to, and it was all in PDF, so we had to go through each item practically to discover what had happened. But the original grant revenue had been credited to the general fund in error, and that's where the reversal should have been recorded. So a transfer from the general fund to the bids and deposits fund in the amount of $199,000 was posted to remove the deficit balance. And again, this is shown on page 61 of attachment B, note M, restatements. So unless you have any questions of me, would like to introduce Ingrid Scheiplein, managing partner of Richardson and Company, and she's going to review and summarize the financial statements for the fiscal year 16-17.
I have questions.
Okay.
This looks like a tremendous amount of work, and I appreciate the improvements that have been made. So I just want to say that. But I'm just curious in terms of the procedures that were recommended. So I'm looking at attachment D, the auditor's letter, the top of page 2. Okay. They have a recommendation that to facilitate the closing process, the required closing procedure should be documented in a checklist that indicates who will perform each procedure and when completion of each procedure is due and is accomplished. Did we do that?
For 1819, we will.
I just meant like right now. Are we doing it?
Yeah, in 1819 we will be doing it. Yeah.
Okay. We will be doing it, or we are doing it?
We are doing it. We have
okay.
a checklist. 1718 we didn't have enough staff, so it was pretty much all one person who was doing it. So.
And then the next part, ensure that all balance sheet accounts are reviewed and reconciled to supporting schedules and are reviewed and approved prior to the beginning of fieldwork. Are we doing that?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then in terms of the capital assets, do we have now a procedure, or it was forthcoming about removing items from the capital asset list?
Well, we have a procedure, but there were some items on the capital asset list that were they were dumped in as lump sum items, so we're still determining some of those lump sum items. So it's hard to inventory when you, like if an entry is made for a lump sum item and you don't know what it is, so we're reconciling some of those items. But for the most part, if we do have a procedure for old assets being retired, taken out of the asset list, but it is a work in progress. And the other thing is we don't have a formal capital asset.
What, the thresholds?
Yeah.
And
So
is that coming back?
Yes, that will come back to council this year.
Oh, okay. And then of this $1,927,000 of capital assets that are unidentified, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Oh, and is it the same number now?
It is. No, actually, we've narrowed it down. In 1718, we narrowed it down to, I think it's down to 400,000. And really, what it was is it's usually public works projects that are brought in as, normally they would come in as improvements along the way on one project, but they could have been brought in as.
Could you just give a concrete example of it?
Trying to think of one. So I think what we were. the one item was it was probably public work projects that, or I can't think of a concrete example.
Or just like
right now.
how, not one that you've seen even here, but how it would work.
I haven't had this happen before, so I haven't been in.
I'm
another
having
city.
a hard time understanding what this is, so that's
Yeah.
why I was hoping you could.
So.
So I think part of the mayor's question is like what is included within the capitalization? So kind of what, how does it work? Like we redo, like we put, for example, like I'm just thinking like our water project, that was a $3 million project where, done about 18 months ago. So that's a project that you have a value. Let's just pretend it was a $3 million project.
And so it could happen over several fiscal years where you haven't completed the entire project, but you've
The value is the increased value of the asset after the improvements.
right. So
Oh, okay.
I mean, a better example would be, say, if you were doing a remodel of a building and it took over several years. Well, during the process, you're spending money in one fiscal year, but when the project is finally completed, it becomes one asset. But
So you start off with the original value, and then you stick with the carry value, and then when the project is complete, you're supposed to update it to the improved value.
in each fiscal year, if you're adding improvements, then that becomes part of the asset.
Oh,
So,
okay,
Yeah, and these assets, so they were posted again.
So it's like a line item that says capital assets with $1 next to it, but nobody knows what they're, or
Yeah.
with regard to $400,000 now, we don't know what it's tied
but
to.
they're quite old, and they were, but they haven't been depreciated down yet, so,
And then at some point, if we can't identify what those are, will they be written off, or what would happen to that? Will they just stay on as unidentified forever, or?
They would be written off, right?
Oh,
Right,
okay.
so that's why we have a contract person who was going through that, and he's done a lot of work on that, so, but
And do you think you're at the end of the line of being able to figure it out now?
we might be. We have to go,
okay.
we were going back through moms, and again, it's a very flat system, and it's in a PDF, so sometimes when those,
What does flat mean?
I mean, what I mean is it's not interactive.
It's
Like,
not
you can't-
search.
yeah,
It's not
It's not
searchable.
searchable, so, like the work that I did on the bids and deposits fund, I had to go back and just go line by line, because I couldn't recreate.
So just
it.
looking through a paper file, basically, on the
Yeah, that's
computer.
exactly what it
Yeah.
is on the screen, yeah,
Okay.
paper file on the screen.
Okay. And so then at some point, there would be a decision to write that off?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we relabeling and recategorizing these PDFs as we're going through them, so they're easier to kind of understand?
I could, hopefully we'll be done with them.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so. what
So
I-
then they're categorized within the budget, or within the
Within
audit?
the audit, yeah. I mean, we have them all, I mean, we do have for each year, they're contained within the audit files. So I could go back to that year and I could see the PDF files for those years. They weren't labeled very well, but we've relabeled them so we can see what they are now. But
Okay.
hopefully, we're not gonna have to refer to them for much longer.
Okay, so is it easier to understand system?
Yeah.
Presently, okay, good.
And then, just on the next part, on this capital assets part, so have we completed a physical inventory of all fixed assets and reconciled those?
No,
And when will that be done?
that's gonna be part of our process for 18-19.
Oh, it's part of the, what does it mean that, so in terms of,
So we're back 2 years. So this
Okay.
was 16-17.
Yeah.
17-18, we still didn't have all the staff in place that we needed to do all this. I mean, we only found out, this is something that was brought forward in this audit, but we got it this year.
Yeah.
So really, it's going to be part of the 18-19
Oh,
process,
okay.
closing
Okay.
process. Okay.
so these same notes will be on the next audit that we look
For
at?
17-18,
17,
yes.
18,
Yeah.
Okay. And then the next part, review the detailed subsidiary ledger to ensure relevant information is included.
Yeah,
Is that done or will be done?
it's done.
Oh, that is
I mean,
done.
it's
Okay.
being done now, so.
Okay. And then do we have the inventory of the high theft items? Or are we doing that?
I'm sorry. Oh.
The last sentence there, further
Oh.
recommend the city establish an inventory of high theft typed items.
Well, we do that already. We
Okay.
actually do that already. So
Okay, great.
That's done every year. So.
And I recognize that all of this is inherited and you're working and you can't fix 100% of things immediately. So I just want to know where we're at.
Right.
And I appreciate all the things that you're doing to go through this. So then on the financial and accounting manual, what's on the next page, page 4?
So the accounting manual, I mean, as we go along, we're documenting, systems and how we're going to move forward. That's, it's right now we're just trying to get everything straightened out. And as we go along, I mean, there are processes that we're documenting, and then we can put it together in a manual. And each of the desks or the people in finance, have been instructed to document their procedures.
Oh,
So-
okay. What do you think the timing is on doing that?
So
I mean, just a real time. Is it 2 years? I don't know. I'm just curious.
Again, that's something that we would like to have soon, but it's.
I think, I think there's policy work for us to do here too. So part of it, and then there's, kind of the desk manuals, and then wrapping that all up in a bow and putting in a manual. I think part of what finance is trying to do is get clarity in internal processes. So we're cleaning that stuff up. And then there's policy stuff we need to bring back to you, and then all of that will get put together. But honestly, my guess is we're a full year before all of that kind of in an overall manual is going to be put together.
Say so, yeah.
I was saying 2 years. I just want to go through
Good,
the
2 years.
recommendations to see it.
Yeah.
And then the receivable reconciliations.
Yes, that's done.
Oh, great.
Yeah, now.
Okay.
So. Our process is, our hope is to have.
Or maybe, can you just go through these because thanks.
Especially for balance sheet items, that we would have them balanced quarterly, so that by the time we get to the audit, you don't have to go back and do 3 years worth of reconciliations.
Yeah.
You can, so really by the time you get to the audit, if you've been doing your reconciliations all along, then your audit is pretty easy.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so fraud policies and procedures.
What about the past due receivables? Do we have a policy for that?
We're working on that one too, because we don't have there's water past due, and there's a few other past due items, that we don't have policies on. But we do have a collection company that we use, but we haven't really set out any policies for that. So.
Is that a this year policy?
It'll be. Oh, yeah. That's going to be in 1920. Yeah.
Though in terms of water bills, we will be coming back to you sooner on the world of water bills, because there's new state legislation that we will no longer be able to, for a non-payment, turn off people's water bills right away. So there's a whole kind of a new process that we will need to come and bring a policy to you and talk that one through.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And then the fraud policies?
We do have we need to update our fraud policy. We do have a fraud policy, but it needs to be updated.
And do you know?
That's going to be coming
Is that
forward.
what that's meant by formal fraud policy? What does this mean?
Yes.
Oh, so we had an informal one?
Informal. Okay. Yeah. And the
Uh,
same thing with the wire transfer policy. We've implemented that in 1819. So.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And treasury reports, those are coming forward. You've been getting the financial reports since, I think, March of this year. And then we will have a treasury report coming in on October 7th. Right? Is that when we decided? 16th? 17th? 7th? Yeah.
Are all of the quarterly treasury and other financial reports mentioned here that it's to actuals and all that? This is being done now in the report we get?
Yes, and then you haven't seen the cash and investment report yet, the treasurer's report. I call it the treasurer's report. That's never been presented to council. We do have the information. We're going to bring it at the next council meeting. So,
and then originally on the we're only receiving information on the certain, not all 50 funds.
Right.
And at some point will we receive some summary of that or no?
Probably not. It's the majority. The funds that you should be receiving would be the major funds. So it would be general fund, and then we would like to get to water and cemetery as well.
But anyway, under our code, it was required that we receive all the funds. So we would at some point we would have to
right. But there's
change
usually
that.
no activity, and there's not a lot of activity in all those funds. So we could give you the balance, but if there isn't, I've never seen reports on all funds that cities have. It's the major funds.
Okay. And then the LAIF transfers?
Yes, that was implemented in 1819. So
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else have questions?
Well, now that we just went through the cliff notes of all this report, I was sitting here laughing. But, you know, and I wanted to tell the mayor I have a heart next to your name, Amy, because of the check cashing, the stamp. It's interesting. There was one question, and I know these aren't GASB regulations. I use smiley faces and frowny faces, up arrows for my econ and down arrows from econ, and explain things rather than trying to go through all of it. I think it's amazing. I don't know how you all did it. Thank goodness for the different staff. And I know with the capital assets, you still need to do the inventory of assets and accrual accounting when not you, but bills were paid and there were no bills. So those are the things I think that happened some time ago.
I think are you referring to the checks?
I'm going back to financial reporting and accounting system.
Oh, okay. So what happened there was that we had an accounting technician that misunderstood what we were telling her. And so when you get towards the end of the year, you have bills that are posted in the prior fiscal year or the new fiscal year. And so we told her that all invoices for the prior year had to be posted in the prior fiscal year. She misinterpreted that, so she posted all the checks in the prior fiscal year as of June 30th. And so that's why we had to do that journal entry. So it was just a miscommunication and then, she thought she was doing the right thing, but it just caused a large journal entry to be posted for that last check run.
So under page 2, way at the bottom, we recommend that the city streamline accounting process. I don't have anything else to refer to other than page 2, the review function should include monitoring compliance with city policy and generally accepted accounting principles. So that's something you're obviously, the reconciliation, accounting processes, you're looking at that. How is that? How do you do that?
That's what we've been doing extensively. That's really when first day we started, or I started, that's what we've been doing and Kathy's been doing to get best practices and policies, because you need policies in order to, for best practices,
Right.
and then the accounting procedures follow that, so.
And you're right about severe and what was the other one, managerial? The severe.
Oh, yeah, they sound
deficiency.
opposite, don't they?
Yeah, because severe seems more serious, and
Right.
it's like you had to adjust your brain.
Right, I
So
think it
that's
relates to a material
smiley face
large.
work there. So I'm amazed. I really, really am amazed at how, and thank goodness for the transition of teams in accounting. And I know that years ago, when we changed to whatever, it left the general ledger where money in, money out. There were no accounts. Big ledger. This is what I understand when a former city manager started here. And so I just really compliment you and your team because it's an awful lot of work, and just to read it was a lot of work, but I really appreciate it, and I understand some of the things. I have no idea how you've gotten to where you are now. I have to compliment you. I don't know. Maybe you did a sage burning in your department. I have no idea. I have no idea how it happened, but I really want to compliment you and thank the auditor for making sense out of nonsense.
Yes. So do you have any other further questions? She's just going to give a quick presentation on the financials. So, and she's been here twice. And
thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Good evening. I had a PowerPoint all prepared, and I understand you're having technical difficulties. Do you want to hand out? Oh, you do have a copy of it? Okay. So the second slide in the package just lists out the reports that were issued and the related attachments in your package. Then the slide on audit results and observations. Sue, by the way, did a very thorough introduction, so I'm just going to touch on these so to not duplicate the presentation. But as Sue indicated, we issued a clean opinion. However, there were an unusually large number of audit adjustments during the audit process because of the turnover. The city had a contracted employee that had no experience with the city to come in. That, combined with having really no written procedures for that individual to follow, just made for a difficult situation all the way around. And so that resulted in the large number of adjustments and resulted in that first comment about the material weaknesses that we were just discussing, the areas where errors were noted. The next slide after that is the financial statement highlights. I'm just going to touch real high level on the numbers. I don't want to bore you with a lot of numbers. It's up to you if you want to refer to that page within the financials. I have the page numbers indicated here. The first numbers I'm going to talk about are related to governmental activities. And governmental activities refers to basically your general fund and all your special revenue funds, everything but the water and the cemetery funds. And that particular page of the financial statements has all the assets, all the liabilities of the city, including bonds, pension liability. That reporting is done similar to commercial enterprise accounting. So if you look at the numbers there, you have an unrestricted equity or net position of $2.2 million. And that's after reflecting a pension liability of $10.8 million. A lot of agencies we deal with, by the time you back out the pension liability, there's basically zero net position. So I think the fact that the city has a positive net position even after that pension liability, which is, the pension liability is a long-term, not what you currently owe, but just a long-term pension liability. So I think that it's indicating that the city is in good financial condition. The next slide is in relation to the general fund. So that's looking at just the general fund that you're accustomed to reviewing as part of your financial reports. The fund balance, or the equity section of that fund, has about $4.3 million of reserves, emergency and operating reserves, that were set up under an old policy. I think you've since implemented a new reserve policy, so that terminology would be different now, but back at this point in time you had 4.3 in emergency and operating reserves, and then you had an additional $4 million of additional reserves that were not earmarked for any purposes. So overall the general fund had reserves available of $8 million. Again, a good financial condition. The next slide is the general fund revenues and expenses. The general fund had a positive or net income with revenues exceeding expenses of $436,000. Really what contributed to that, if you look at what you budgeted compared to what actually occurred, your property taxes were about $500,000 higher than what you had anticipated. The general fund number you're seeing there also include the IGT, which is the intergovernmental transfers revenue, which is the money coming from the state for the Medi-Cal transports. That revenue is tracked in a separate fund, and I believe you budget for it separately, but as far as these financial statements, it's included within the general fund. The next slide is the water fund, and it's showing reserves available of $1.6 million. And that's after its share of the pension liability of $1.5 million. And this was one of the adjustments or changes that we made in previous fiscal years. The pension liability was only recorded or attributable to your governmental activities. But since your water and your cemetery funds do have employees, we allocated a portion of the pension liability to the water fund and to the cemetery fund. So the water fund's share of that pension liability is $1.5 million. The water fund also had a positive revenue exceeding expenses during the year by $63,000. The internal service funds are funds that provide services to other cities. It includes like your vehicle replacement fund, employee benefits, building maintenance, and other funds. It had reserves available in total of $4 million. It had revenues exceeding expenses of $632,000, but the main reason for that is that its only funding source are contributions from other city funds. And as Sue had pointed out, there was a transfer to cover a deficit that you'd been carrying in the Employee Benefits Fund. So there's a $943,000 transfer from the general fund to the Employee Benefits Fund that essentially zeroes out that account. The next slide is note E on interfund transfers. That footnote discusses the fact that there were transfers that occurred from your water fund to your general fund from the time period of July of 2014 to June 30 of 17, primarily franchise fees and property taxes that were transferred. Your legal counsel determined that those are disallowed. So as part of the audit, we reflected that as a loan between the water fund and the general fund. So the general fund is showing a liability of $500 and some thousand owing back to the water fund to resolve the issue of those transfers. The next slide is related to note M, restatements. What a restatement is where we change fund balance to correct or reclassify a transaction that was recorded incorrectly in a previous year. So I have listed out here a few of the areas where we had those restatements. One of them was the June of 16 water billing that was put in the wrong fiscal year. It should have been in fiscal year 16 instead of 17, so we did an entry for that. We also reclassified like I said, the disallowed water fund transfers, we reclassified. And then the third bullet there, as I also indicated previously, part of the pension liability was allocated to the water and the cemetery funds. And then the fourth bullet there is what Sue was discussing as far as the corrections when she completed the reconciliation of the developer funds. It was determined that there was $199,000 that was incorrectly recorded, so it was adjusted as part of this audit. The next slide, entitled Required Communications, those are the items that are contained within the governance letter. That letter contains a number of items we're required to disclose to you. I've just highlighted one area here, and that's the audit adjustments. Page 2 discusses the fact that we had 50 adjustments during the audit process, which is unusually large. But as I discussed with the audit committee, the goal is to be 10 or less. So that's the reason why we're saying that that's an area for improvement in the financial reporting processes. And the reason for making the recommendations.
It's only 5 times the max. That's fine.
The next few slides are, I'm just going to touch on very quickly because Sue did go over those in detail, and you've also asked questions in detail about that. So the internal control letter is fairly lengthy because of the turnover that the city had experienced in those fiscal years. Pretty much the employees that were responsible for closing the books were no longer there to finish out the closeout process. So so temporary employees had to come, not temporary, but contracted employees had to come in and basically close the books with really having no background, no documents to go by. And one of the reasons why we recommended the documenting the accounting processes is so that if you do have turnover, someone can come in and know what needs to be done. And so that compounded the issue is the fact that there was no written procedures for that person to follow, and hence the large number of adjustments. As Sue had pointed out, we classify findings into 3 different categories. Material weakness is the most severe, significant deficiency after that, and then we have other recommendations. So we have the 3 items that were the material weaknesses are the financial reporting processes that we had discussed. And the capital asset accounting, we also considered a material weakness because there are some significant balances that need to be reconciled, and also policies and procedures need to be set up. And then we also considered the interfund loan as a material weakness because there needs to be a formal loan agreement that's put in place that discusses repayment of that loan. And then the one item that we had as the significant deficiency is the issue with the signature stamp. And I think the main issue there is that it kind of defeats the purpose of having control or oversight of that individual if that individual is not actually reviewing it, but just having, someone supplying a signature stamp. But along with that recommendation, I think you currently require 2 signatures on all checks. That's not really necessary. The banks don't require that any longer. So as long as there's one live signature on the check, we feel that that's sufficient.
Can I ask you a question about that? So
Sure.
I think I read in your report that you recommend that the city manager be the check signer. And
Well-
why is that? I think
Well, not necessarily just the city
okay.
manager. I would suggest at least 3 management members be signers
I
on
thought
the
I read
account.
that in the audit that it was suggested that it be the city manager.
Well, I think what we were
Oh.
getting at is that it should be a live signature or wet signature.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's
as
with
opposed
regard
a
to
stamp.
signing it, not the who.
Right, not who,
exactly. Oh.
right, yeah. And then the other recommendations are just areas where we noted issues that we wanted to bring to your attention, but we didn't classify them as material weaknesses. I won't go over those in detail. You've already gone through those and asked questions about those. So, I think that the city's definitely on the right track with getting these items resolved. But as was pointed out, since this is an audit from 2 years ago, you will see a lot of the same items in the 17-18 audit just because of the timing of the audit. And some of these couldn't have been resolved because the city hadn't known about them at that point in time. So with that, are there any questions I can
Yeah,
answer?
I do. Do you have recommendations for, I think I read it somewhere, for reconciling? Should it be quarterly, monthly?
It should be quarterly. The issue that the city was running across as an example, the water billing reconciliation. They did a reconciliation at the end of the year. If you're off, you pretty much have to go through all 12 months to look for it. It just makes it easier to do it during the year. But we would recommend at least quarterly reconciliations, yeah.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? No. I will open it up for public comment if there's any. Seeing no one here except for these fabulous people, I will close public comment and bring it back to the council for comments or a motion.
What are we doing?
I just want to, take a chance again to again thank staff and Sue especially for really digging in there and digging us out of what seemed to be a hell of a situation. It almost would have been better if the PDFs were actually in paper mode, because then you could have flipped through them rather than double clicking on each one and waiting for them to open. That sounds like an absolute nightmare. I'm glad to see that the city's finances are going to be in better order and in a more understandable and smooth process. So I just want to thank you for all your work and all that you continue to do. And thank you to the auditor for coming through for us and recommending some good changes. And I'm glad to hear that we're on the process to fixing the holes that we have and improving what we've got here. So it's good news.
And I also think that our change in auditors, that Councilmember Cook and I were on the audit committee previously, and I think this was more helpful with the recommendations and more specific. So I think just in terms of digestibility about what the work is that needs to be done and understanding, it was really helpful, and obviously a tremendous amount of work. I think some words you never want to hear said about your finances is that I've never seen that before. So that doesn't sound too good, but I appreciate your willingness to take on that task. So I don't know what the motion is to approve or accept or whatever it is, but
Yeah, I'm offline, so I don't know what the motion should be.
So the motion would be to accept the fiscal year 16-17 audit financial statements.
I'd like to make a motion
wait.
to.
Some
Sorry.
comments. More comments. Councilmember Hundley.
I would like to make a comment, Vice Mayor Harvey. Thank you all for all of that information. Thank you for all the good questions up here. And I have to repeat the thank yous to Sue and Kathy for patiently wading through this situation that, and just for posterity, I wanted to go back to 2014 when the city hired a finance director in preparation of separating the city manager position, because the city manager had historically done the job of the finance director. In fact, she did the budget herself. So the idea was, for continuity, we'd add a finance director, and that would sort of bridge the gap when our city manager retired into the new one came on board. And little did we know, less than a month before you came, we were suddenly without both a city manager or a finance director. And as it turns out, there were things that needed to be improved upon. And I know that it was not an easy thing. And I know that, Sue, you were doing a lot of work yourself. And I'm happy to hear that you have a staff to move forward in a good way. And I know we get to do this all over again in a couple months when we do 17-18. But I feel very good about the shape that we're getting in. And, I think that the way that Sonoma was operating probably served itself just fine at one point. But the world got more complicated, and now we have to be more sophisticated too. So, and I definitely appreciate our auditor. This was refreshing to read, even though it wasn't all positive. So, thank you.
Councilmember Cook?
Yeah, I just want to, I'll keep it short. Thank you. I do like the transparency that this audit, like Mayor Harrington said, the last one was a little bit harder to read and sit in there, and it's good. And it's good to see that we're at a state where we can show, great financials. But hopefully, all these things that we have in the pipeline will be fixed, and will be less than 10 at some point. So, thanks.
Do we have a motion?
Just Mayor Harrington, before you ask for a motion, can I just also acknowledge Jenna Burrows, our Deputy Finance Director. Jenna's been part of the team, and her expertise over the last year coming on has made a big difference too. Again, it's about having, it takes a team. There's and the right people on the bus. So I just want to thank Sue and Jenna, and I also want to thank council support, because we have changed the structure. You've approved adding a position, and your acknowledgement about the importance of financial management and financial transparency is super key. It is the foundation of everything we do. If we don't know where we are, we don't know how much money we have, we don't know what we can do. So, we are moving forward on a variety of best practices, but I want to thank council for your support.
So I just have one last comment. So I'd like to say, with my permission, you may use my smiley, frowny faces and my up and down arrows to work on your audits. And but I think it's unbelievable. I don't know. I would have given up. I can imagine every day when you would go to our city manager's office and she'd go, what now? So thank you both. Thank you all.
I did have the thought that, the more experienced you are, the larger your options are for selecting jobs that have a varying level of difficulty. So when you have a lot of experience, you don't necessarily need to select a job that's extremely difficult. That's been my professional experience, and I appreciate that you took this on, even though I'm sure there's many more pleasant opportunities that you could have pursued. Motion?
I think Logan started.
Move to approve the reading of the 16-17 budget? No?
The audited financial statements, governance letter, can I read it for you? You got it?
Yeah, just read it and then I'll say yes.
Fiscal year so accept the city's fiscal year 16-17 audit financial statements, governance letter, auditors, internal control letter, and responsible officials' responses.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
That's a so moved, I think.
So moved.
Second. Sir, roll call, please.
Councilmember Agrimonti.
Aye.
Councilmember Cook.
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Harvey.
Yes.
Mayor Harrington.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
And I also want to tell the auditor I really appreciate you coming back tonight, and I apologize for having to leave last time. And on to item 7, council member reports and comments. None.
Well, let's see.
Okay, moving on to item 8, city manager comments and announcements.
I know I have, you know, the last time we didn't have an opportunity for me to report back from, who are we now, Zero Waste. And I think I've already spoken to you, city manager, with respect to the styrofoam and Zero Waste, because it has something to do with indemnification. And that's all my report.
Thank you. Anyone else? No. City manager comments and announcements.
So just two things, and to let the community accounts and councils aware of this, but one of the things we've been working on our public outreach and communication and engagement. You know, as much as we go electronic, there still is a need at times to mail kind of something hard copying to our community, tell them what we've been doing, what we're going to be doing, and any other kind of time-sensitive or critical communication. So we are going to be doing what we're kind of terming an annual report, that'll be kind of a distribution, and will go to all of our residents, and it'll talk about council's goals, accomplishments, some information on budget, and that's also really timely because we're going to be putting out some information about the PG&E public safety power shutoff. So we're going to be using that tool as a way to get that information in everyone's hands. So looking at that going out early October. And then the other, just last item I wanted to apprise folks, we were here talking about the public safety power shutoffs and extended power outages. I told council that we were working closely with the county to get the Vets Memorial Center ready. And so very excited to tell you all that it is the new transfer switch has been fixed, upgraded. That switch and generator that is already, I actually got a picture today, this afternoon, so the generator's on site with fuel. So it is completely there, ready to go. And that generator will allow us to have HVAC and power the electricity in the 2 large rooms of vets. So I think this is a very important improvement for our community and for the valley, that we have a site that we can use as a cooling resource center. It also means that it is fixed and ready, for the future, hopefully for emergency, if we need emergency shelter as well. So I want to thank county staff and general services and Supervisor Gorin and the county CAO and the Office of Emergency Management. There were a lot of conversations, but general services staff worked it through. So pleased to provide that update to all of you as well.
That's great. City attorney?
Nothing for tonight.
All right, meeting's adjourned.